I'm Emily MacArthur.
And I'm Kshama Sawant. Thank you for joining us for our election night analysis. Unlike the mainstream media, we'll be talking about the election results from the point of view of working people and the oppressed, not the corporate elite. We'll also be talking about the next steps for working people and the anti-war movement after this election to carry forward our momentum. Worker Strike Back has been on the ground in key swing states, including the state of Michigan, getting out the vote for Jill Stein. Worker Strike Back members from Seattle, Boston, Kansas City, Chicago, and Rochester, Minnesota have set their lives aside for many weeks to get out the vote for Jill Stein in Michigan. We've been at the coffee houses, at the mosques, at the university campuses, and at the doors getting out every possible anti-war vote. Our message is no votes for genocide, no votes for Harris, no votes for Trump. Vote for the strongest anti-war pro-worker candidate, Jill Stein.
Welcome to On Strike. Workers Strike Back is on the ground here at the Muslim Coalition early voting rally. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jessica Przinski, and I'm a member of Workers Strike Back, and I'm a Michigan voter.
Could I ask you why you're here today? Earlier today, Workers Strike Back, we were on the ground tabling at a local Arabic market. Could you tell me about your experience and why you're here today?
Yeah, I've been out all day giving out flyers. We were at the Dearborn Fresh Market, and now we're at the library. We're saying no to the genocide, no vote for Harris, no vote for Trump, and asking voters to vote for Jill Stein as a vote against genocide.
Yeah, Workers Strike Back in a Democratic vote a couple of months ago, we endorsed Jill Stein. Obviously, as you know, she's the strongest left independent candidate that our movements have. You're a Michigan voter. People are saying right now that Michigan is so crucial for this election. We were talking with some people earlier, just even at this event, that are calling for a safe state strategy. As a Michigan voter, what are your thoughts on that? You say you're calling for a vote for Jill Stein. What do you say to those people that are calling for a safe state strategy for Kamala Harris and Jill Stein?
It makes me angry because you can't support and fund a genocide and expect us to vote for you. What I've been telling people at the Fresh Market was every vote for Jill Stein, the Democrats will know that it's a vote against genocide. And that's the message that we need to send.
Yeah, not only a vote against genocide, but for things that a working class party should represent: a living wage, $25 an hour, Medicare for all, free college, affordable housing. These are all things that are on the Workers Strike Back platform and that are essential for any working class party. We've been on the ground all day today. And we were at the Arab market this morning at the grocery store. Could you tell me a little bit about the conversations you were having with people? What were they saying to you about, our slogan of no Harris, no Trump, no votes for genocide?
Right. So when people were on their way into the Fresh Market grocery store, I would go up and say, no vote for genocide, no Harris, no Trump. And usually people would sort of stop and take a flyer and look like grateful and happy and excited that someone was out there saying what they were thinking. I'd say probably 95% of people were like supportive right off the bat. A bunch of people said they already voted for Stein or they were going to. A smaller number of people said, well, then who do we vote for? And they had not heard of Jill Stein. A couple people said that they voted for Trump because they wanted to send Harris a message and vote against genocide. And that's unfortunate. We want to tell those people, don't vote for Trump, vote for Stein.
So, Jessica, you identified as a member of Workers Strike Back. Could I ask you why you decided to join Workers Strike Back? What motivated you to join?
Sure. I'm a new member of Workers Strike Back. It's only been a month or two. What motivated me is that we have a presidential election. I don't think it's sufficient to just abstain and to not have a plan. I think voting for Jill Stein is a very concrete thing that can move us forward. I also think it has to be our mission to break from the two-party system. We need a third party that's for the workers and the oppressed. And I do believe that this is a good concrete step in that direction.
And just to explain what the safe state strategy is, it's you have the so-called safe states and the so-called swing states, and this is all in relation to whether or not there's a chance that Trump could win against Harris. And what makes a swing state is that it's too close to call. They're running neck and neck. And the so-called safe state strategy demands that people who are angry at the war, angry at the cost of living, should only vote against these two parties and for Jill Stein in a state where it is guaranteed that Harris will win, like Washington State, which is a so-called safe state. But in fact, Worker Strike Back has called for the exact opposite strategy, which is an offensive strategy, which is actually getting out the vote in the swing states, because we want to send send a message to both the Democrats and Republicans, not because we think that they can be reformed, but because we want to build the anti-war movement and working people's movement based on the strength of the audacity of that kind of strategy. And so if you are in one of the states where polling is still open and you haven't voted yet, go vote now for Jill Stein. And if there's a line and it seems like it will take a while to vote, we'd appeal to you to stay in the line no matter how long it takes. And even if you're being intimidated by Democrats or Republicans trying to discourage you from voting third party. We have an exciting lineup of guests for you at tonight's live stream. Nick Cruz from the Revolutionary Blackout Network will be joining us, as will Keaton Weiss and Russell Dabbler from the Due Dissidents podcast. We'll have Worker Strike Back correspondents from Michigan, including a special live report from on the ground in Dearborn coming up soon. We also have a Worker Strike Back member joining us from Boston to talk about the abortion rights ballot measures across the nation.
The first swing state to close its polls is Georgia, which just happened a few minutes ago. North Carolina will close its polls shortly at 7:30 Eastern Time. We won't know the most consequential results until later tonight, and we'll discuss them as they come in. And I mean, it may even take days, as many have been discussing. But one way or another, what appears to be the tightest U.S. presidential race in modern U.S. history is about to draw to a close. Let's hear from some Michigan voters who talked to us today as they cast their ballots at the polling stations.
So can you just introduce yourself, maybe say your name, where you're from if you like, and who you're voting for and why?
Yes, my name is Maher Zaatari. I am originally Lebanese. I have been here from 1976. And I did vote for Jill Stein because she is against genocide, the equal rights, and the human sense. We are losing the human sense. We are losing our natural human dignity. That's the main reason. And I hope it will be a step for change and for our future generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name's Leah, and I'm a sophomore here at UMD, and I'm a biology major. I will be voting third party for Jill Stein this election. It's going to be my first election voting, but that's not going to stop me from hoping that this will build a greater third party movement, because again, we only need 5% of people to receive funding for the next election happening in 4 years. And also I'm Middle Eastern. There's so much pressure to line up for Kamala. Why? Because obviously Trump is not going to stand behind us as Middle Eastern people and as Muslim people. He's just not going to do that. No matter how much he comes down here in Dearborn, and no matter how much he comes to the Great Commoner and acts like he's anti-war, he is very much pro-war. And I feel a lot of pressure to line up for Kamala because a lot of other people I know my age are doing it because they don't have a lot of faith in building up the third party movement. But I think it takes a bit of time and a little bit of faith.
Jill Stein, because she's against genocide. She's against war. This is my main concern as of right now. So that's the reason why I'm voting for Jill Stein.
Would you mind sharing your name and maybe where you're from, if you're comfortable?
Yeah, my name is Isam from Dearborn, Michigan, originally from Yemen. So I've been hearing a lot from other people. I've heard people talk about it. I know people that are voting for Jill Stein. The main concern is the genocide that's happening overseas.
I'm so sad for that. I support Green. I'm sorry because my language is very bad. I need to talk a lot of things, but you know what I mean? You kill kids. You know what? If I hug my kids on the night, I tell story. What about kids? Palestine kids? It's very bad. You hug kids, your kids warm, cold, kids die, kids. I'm crushed. I'm so sad about this.
A upsetting, but it's, I think this is the exact kind of coverage you don't see on the corporate media of just ordinary people reacting to the horrors of what's happening in Gaza and, taking action, not feeling guilty or, any confusion, just absolute clarity about what needs to be done, which is to punish the pro-war parties and clearly vote against the war.
Yeah, and that woman's testimony was so important because it shows that unlike the system of capitalism itself and the purveyors of genocide, which are the capitalist class and their political representatives like Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party and Donald Trump and the Republican Party, unlike them, ordinary people in this system, in our society, have so much empathy and compassion. And also, like you said, most importantly, courage to act on that empathy and say, I want to hug my kids at night. I want to keep them warm. But what about those kids who are dying? And you were earlier when we were talking, Emily, you were talking about you were mentioning the rate at which the babies and children under 2 have been killed. It's just unimaginable.
Yeah, and I mean, to connect it to the capitalist system, absolutely. I think you also had mentioned just how this is the way that capitalism attempts to make ordinary people feel like these things are okay. Is it forces it dehumanizes certain people, right? And right now, there's a mission to dehumanize Palestinian children and Palestinian people in general. And it's just really moving to see people who reject that outright, right? They say we are humanity, and those kids are just like my kids.
Right, and that's why it's important that Worker Strike Back organizers are in Michigan and have been for the last month and a half, actually, to get out the anti-war vote for Jill Stein.
Yeah, and I mean, so it's great that we have this coverage of people coming out of the polls. And as I mentioned before, we shouldn't be surprised if we don't get clear results tonight in the presidential election. In 2020, the election wasn't called for Joe Biden until 4 days later. But regardless of how long it takes for the results to arrive, we know that come Inauguration Day in January, there will be a new warmonger in chief in the White House, a new representative of the billionaire class, whether that's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Regardless of which party is in power, we will need to build the anti-war movement and the workers' movement to fight back. And we urgently need a new anti-war working class party so that ordinary people have something to vote for. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. If you've watched On Strike before, you'll know that we provide an analysis from the point of view of working class people about the problems we face in our daily lives under capitalism. In every episode, On Strike also presents a strategy for working class movements to fight back. Please also join Worker Strike Back and become part of our fight against the billionaires and their political servants. Go to workerstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. Immediately after this election, we need to seize the moment to begin planning for the next steps. We currently have in-person Worker Strike Back meetings scheduled in Chicago, Seattle, Boston, Kansas City for next week, to have that discussion immediately, as well as a national Zoom meeting if you live elsewhere. Please sign up on our website at workerstrikeback.org/events. Worker Strike Back has said that every vote for Jill Stein matters because it's a vote against the genocide, and because the campaign can help serve as a launch pad. So we have to take that momentum, right, to build a strong enough anti-war movement, a workers' movement to force change. And one of the first steps will be to begin building for protests at the inauguration in January, regardless of it's Harris or Trump being sworn in. We need to send a clear message day one, right out of the gate. This genocide must end. The brutal occupation must end, and all military funding to Israel must end. We need to protest with clear-cut demands, and we need to link up the anti-war movement with the labor movement. As we've said before, we will need strike action if we're going to be powerful enough to end the genocide. We'll also need strike action to win big victories like Medicare for all and a federal $15 an hour minimum wage, demands that are in Jill Stein's platform. On Saturday, February 22nd, Worker Strike Back will hold a mass organizing conference for working people and the anti-war movement to discuss our next steps. That same weekend, on Sunday, February 23rd, we'll have the first in-person Worker Strike Back convention. Both events will be in Seattle. Please register now and make your travel plans early. We want to make sure that working people who are serious about organizing are able to be there in Seattle for this important weekend. And we need your financial support to help make that happen. Please go to workerstrikeback.org/donate.
Tonight, we'll also be hearing from some initial results for the Jill Stein campaign in the election. Worker Strike Back has said that we wanted to win the largest possible vote for Jill Stein, while being clear that it would be extremely unlikely for Stein to get 5 or 10% or more, as the campaign has frequently talked about, much less to win the White House. What can we expect? Given what we've seen in the polls and what we know from past independent left campaigns, we can estimate that it's likely that Jill Stein's vote will be in the neighborhood of 1% of the vote nationally. Most recent polls have showed between 1 and 2%, and in virtually every election, the independent vote gets squeezed in the final weeks as the Democrats step up their lesser evil crusade of lies and scaremongering. Just to give some historical context, the two biggest votes for Green Party campaigns for president came in 2000 and 2016. In 2000, Ralph Nader, who was a household name due to his long fight against corporate power in the US, won nearly 3 million votes, or 2.74% of the popular vote. And in 2016, Jill Stein got just over 1.5 million votes, which was 1.07% of the popular vote. In the wake of Bernie Sanders' first campaign, which saw a huge upswell against the Democratic establishment, I mean, that was a unique situation. However, in 2020, Green Party candidate Howie Hawkins, not surprisingly, got only about 405,000 votes, equivalent to 0.26% of the vote. Most other past Green Party presidential results were in that ballpark. Given the massive lesser evilism brought to bear in this election, with the Democrats saying a second Trump election will mean immediate fascism and the death of democracy in the US, alongside the most recent polling data that we have, we think it is highly unlikely that this election will exceed Ralph Nader's vote in 2000, and that it would be a big victory if more than 1 million people were to vote Stein in this election. We also know that some votes will go to other anti-war candidates, including Cornel West, even though he's on the ballot in far fewer states. Those votes for West, though, also count for our anti-war movement, but they will impact the overall Stein vote. We should celebrate if we win 1 million votes against this genocide. And if it's more than that, well, then that will be that much more wind at our backs to build a stronger movement against the war. We should also celebrate if we win a high vote for Stein in key states and precincts due to the anti-war vote. For example, in Dearborn and Detroit, Michigan, we could see double-digit results for Stein in some precincts as a rejection of the genocide and Kamala Harris. Already, we can see the latest poll by the Council on American Islamic Relations that Stein is essentially tied nationally with Harris among Muslim American voters. I mean, this is incredible. This is absolutely incredible. It would be historic if Stein received anything like that in the election, Muslim and Arab Americans having voted overwhelmingly for Democrats in the recent presidential elections. We should recognize, however, that it would be a tall order to actually defeat Harris in Michigan, which in no way changes the importance of getting out every possible vote for Jill Stein there, as Workers Strike Back and Abandon Harris have been fighting to do. And we disagree with the Green Party about their projections for the elections. We don't think it's good to give working people the idea that there's a realistic chance of winning 5 or 10% or of turning the White House into the greenhouse, as the campaign has sometimes said. Such an approach could actually end up losing potential votes. A lot of working people angry at both parties who can be won over to vote for Jill Stein on the basis of a clear explanation of our movement's goals could end up voting for Harris or Trump instead. They could cast a vote against the lesser of two evils. You know, for them, it's either Trump is a lesser evil or Harris is a lesser evil, or they might end up not voting at all on the basis that Jill Stein can't win. And because no one has explained to them why it's crucial they vote for her anyway in order to strike a blow against a two-party system and to build our movements. We need to explain what can be actually won and why it's worth fighting for. We need to explain the vital need to build mass movements and the deadly contradiction of voting for genocidal candidates when our goal is to stop the genocide and build the anti-war movement. The other issue with saying the campaign can win the White House is the conclusions people are then left with after the election. If people are repeatedly told the campaign will win 5 or 10%, there's a real danger that rather than feeling empowered by our winning a million votes, which itself, as I said, is not guaranteed anyway, in any way, working people feel unnecessarily demoralized. That is not what we need. We need to base ourselves on a sober assessment of material reality and yet set up ambitious, concrete objectives, not relying on what we wish would happen. There appears to be a late surge for Harris in this election, which could affect the anti-war vote. Hatred of Trump and anger over the horrific attacks on abortion rights is driving women and others to the polls for Harris. We're seeing a big early turnout of women, which appears to be for Harris. Whatever happens, if Harris wins, it will be a much more of a vote against the Republicans than for the Democrats. In addition to the presidential race, the House and Senate races will have a real impact on what happens after Election Day. What will happen in the House is too close to call, and there is a 50-50 chance that Democrats or Republicans could hold the majority. The Senate, on the other hand, looks highly likely to go Republican. Neither will in any way represent working people. We know that for sure, unfortunately. Regardless of the final numbers, our movement will have absolutely made our mark in this election and scared the warmongering Democratic Party. And really, we will have sent a powerful message to both parties. This genocide has been effectively live streamed, and we've all watched the horrific scenes playing out.
الناس بتنحرق امامنا، الناس بتنحرق قدامنا يا جماعه، قدامنا الناس بتنحرق، والله ما احنا قادرين نسوي شيء، والله العظيم ما احنا قادرين نسوي شيء، لا احنا قادرين نطفي، لا ميه، لا دفاع مدني، والله ما احنا قادرين.
That was just harrowing and gut-wrenching, and I presume tens of millions of people have watched it. And I believe that was the video that this journalist made just outside where the tents were burning outside the Al-Aqsa hospital. And these were filled with patients who had no room in the hospital. And that was specifically the incident when this 19-year-old software engineering student, Shaban Al-Dalu, was massacred in this incident where he was in one of the tents. He was connected, his body was connected to an IV machine because he was already injured from a previous airstrike, and then he was burned alive in this airstrike alongside his mother. I mean, I just have no words to describe what is happening.
I mean, how could you? There's just every day there's some new horrific video I mean, the one that I think that's sticking out to me was similarly an attack on a hospital, and it was an interview with a doctor who had spent all night trying to rescue patients while that raid was happening, only then to find out that his own child had died in the raid, you know, and this is times tens of thousands. And every single day, as you said, people are just barraged by the horror of this. And it's important that people not become just adjusted to seeing that kind of horror every day, but to turn around and take action.
Yes, absolutely. And it's very much connected with the election. And I remember some people, unfortunately, some of the leadership in Socialist Alternative had claimed that this election will not be decided, at least in part, by the issue of the genocide. And of course, they were completely wrong. And thankfully so, in the sense that it's very clear, as you were saying earlier, Emily, that many working people are speaking out, and regardless of the results in the presidential election, we know that there is mass anger among American people, especially in the Arab and Muslim community, but not just limited to them, about what's happening. We have seen the Lancet estimate, you know, at this point, over 350,000 people who have been butchered in this region.
Yeah.
And that's not even mentioning the deaths in Lebanon.
Yeah, that's ever expanding. And I don't know, we're talking about the role that Palestinian journalists are playing in terms of getting this information out, which is obviously crucial, right? That it's not just kind of happening in silence, but that it is getting out. And I know, by contrast, the role of the Israeli state is propping up an Israeli journalist who actually committed a war crime on live air, you know, hit a detonator button to blow up one of these hospitals. And, you know, just it's really horrific. And it's also, I think, why we've seen the Israeli military has actually been actively pursuing a campaign of trying to eliminate journalists, like that they've been,
Exactly.
crosshairs on journalists who are in Palestine, because they know that it evokes mass sympathy from ordinary people around the globe, which is pressure against, the expansion of their war.
Right, exactly. And for all these reasons, we know it will be empowering for our movement to demonstrate that we do not support the Democrats as some kind of lesser evil, and we will not give them our votes. We will not accept the idea that the only dangers present are from a Trump victory, which is the argument of those who support a lesser evil approach.
Among those, sadly, as you mentioned already, Kshama and I's former organization, Socialist Alternative, who, while formally saying they support Jill Stein, have not lifted a finger to campaign for the anti-war vote. Instead, Socialist Alternative stresses again and again how dangerous Trump is and that it's quote unquote correct to fear him. Their effective position is that it's somehow not correct to campaign in swing states for Stein, and they have attacked us for doing so. They say that it's not the Democrats or the two-party system that will pay a political price if Harris loses due to our movement campaigning in those swing states, but working people. But that's nothing more than a word salad, of sort of a pseudo-socialist version of lesser evilism. And it's sad to see how far Socialist Alternative is going down this dead-end road. They claim to stand for a working class party, but how do they think that a working class party is going to come about with ever defeating the Democratic Party we had to fight tooth and nail in your elections, right? And like Kamala Harris, in what fantasy universe do they think it's possible for working people to build our own party and win victories against the billionaire class without defeating the Democrats? These people who claim to stand for revolution don't want to upset the status quo, and they seem to have not learned a thing from our decade-long experience in Seattle, where we used our socialist city council office to extract countless victories from a Democrat majority council who fought us tooth and nail. In reality, in the absence of actively campaigning for the anti-war, pro-worker campaign of Jill Stein, like Worker Strike Back has carried out for months, more votes will go to Trump in Michigan and elsewhere as Arab Americans and others furious at genocide reject the Democratic Party. Even from the point of view of Socialist Alternative's lesser evil position, this is a terrible strategy and a bankrupt approach. We should be clear. Both a Harris administration and a Trump administration will be an absolute disaster for working people, for the oppressed, including the people of Gaza, and for the environment. If Harris wins, despite the deep and widespread anger at her and the Democrats on the cost of living crisis, on the genocide, then she and her party will only be more emboldened to attempt to carry out their horrific agenda and ignore working people, careening further to the right. It's simple logic. The Democrats weren't threatened enough by the potential loss of this election to Trump, who they warn is a fascist and will send us all to concentration camps, to even make an empty promise of a change of policy toward this genocide. What incentive would they have to heed the anti-war movement after they win, despite having completely snubbed the movement? The Harris campaign even went on record saying they don't agree that it even is a genocide. Her campaign said that Harris, quote, didn't agree with defining the war as a genocide, and she has not expressed such a stance in the past, as this is not her position, unquote.
And, Harris has also abandoned Medicare for all and banning fracking and embraced the border wall during the election. So how can we possibly expect that they will do anything with a victory other than double down on their billionaire agenda, their climate apocalypse agenda? Harris shamelessly proclaimed the endorsement of lifelong warmonger Dick Cheney, who has the blood of more than 1 million people killed in the US war against Iraq, which was a war strongly supported by the Democratic Party. Harris is touting the support of one of the most ghastly warmongers that has ever lived, while warning Americans about Trump being a fascist. Harris also made the right-wing Republican Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, her most prominent campaign surrogate. This is the same Liz Cheney who celebrated the dismantling of Roe v. Wade.
Liz Cheney really is a leader who puts country above party and above self, a true patriot, and it is my profound honor to have your support. And I also want to thank your father, Vice President Dick Cheney, for his support and what he has done to serve our country.
And in fact, we know that
gushing
yeah,
in that
yeah.
footage.
Exactly. And if embracing warmongers wasn't enough, the Democrats recently removed a Detroit Muslim and a Democratic Party supporter, no less, from a Harris campaign event that featured Liz Cheney for no apparent reason other than his anti-war views.
So yeah, they never told me why they kicked me out. I was sitting there. I was not planning to protest or anything. It was a small event by invitation only. It was not a rally. So I would just go in there because it was 5 minutes away from my home, the city where I ran in Royal Oak, Michigan. And I was cleared. I was seated. Then after that, they asked me to leave, and I left. And they have not provided any explanation. They said just they regret what happened without providing an explanation. No. I think it is for them. We're giving them headache because our message is very simple and clear, and it's appealing to a lot of young people. And when we bring it inside the platform of the party, that's when you feel this is dangerous for them. They were okay with us going out and protesting and doing anything, and they said, "Yeah, there is freedom here." But when you want this freedom in action, if I say, okay, I'm going to challenge you, I'm going to run for office, I want a platform, I want to speak at your convention, then true will show. And it will show that they don't really want democracy. And this is for both parties, by the way. They don't want democracy. They want to keep control over both parties and over our political system. This is really, and I told some of the Democratic Party, this is considered the death of the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party all the energy in the Democratic Party is created from the left. So even if the left of the Democratic Party maybe like 10%, let's say 10%, I don't have scientific data, but let's say if it's even 10%, those are the active 10%. I ran a campaign and all the support that I got from the left, I didn't have much money, but I had people from the left that would volunteer for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, going knocking doors, making phone calls. This energy come only from the left, does not come from anybody else. So maybe they are small in number and they say, okay, maybe we don't care about this 10%, but they are making most of the work inside the Democratic Party. This is so dangerous for the Democratic Party, because if you lose the left, you lose the energy inside the Democratic Party.
Republican to her cabinet should she win, and no one should be surprised if this is Liz Cheney herself or someone else equally vile. On the other hand, if Harris loses and Trump wins, then there should be no expectation at all that it will mean anything other than disaster for working people. Those who are holding out hope for better things, if Trump gets elected and a second Trump presidency, are going to be in for a rude surprise. This slogan that the Trump campaign adopted in recent weeks of vote Trump, vote peace is a cruel joke on working people. It is reminiscent of war hawk Republican President Richard Nixon's so-called, quote unquote, secret plan to end the Vietnam War. And of course, after he was elected, he escalated that war and invaded Cambodia. We should have no doubt that Trump will follow through on his promised tax cuts for the corporate elite, while his promises of tax cuts for tipped workers will likely be out the window. He is a representative of the billionaires as much as Kamala Harris, and certainly he has no regard for democracy at all, but neither does Kamala Harris, and we don't hear a peep out of either of them as the worst attacks on students' rights to protest take place on campuses around the country in what are likely the worst such attacks since the Vietnam War.
Absolutely.
And I think we have Keaton Weiss ready to come to the studio. So maybe we should welcome Keaton. Hi, Keaton.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey, how are you
Thanks
guys?
so much for joining us. We're good. So just to let you know, Keaton, we
Oh,
of
thanks
course
for
have
having me.
our
It's
whole
great to be
broadcast
here.
team here. Great. And my co-host, Emily MacArthur, is here with me.
Hi there. Nice to meet you.
And I know, Keaton, you and Russell are doing your own live stream And so I really appreciate you joining us here. I know there's a bit of a delay, sound delay, so we'll try to make the best out of that. But I wanted to ask, and we have you only for about maybe 10 or 12 minutes. So can you tell us what you're thinking about the election so far, election results?
Well, so far, I mean, what we've been doing is we've been sort of trying to weigh the margins in the different counties against 2020. So far, it looks like it's more or less tracking with 2020. The one county that everybody's got their eye on is Fayette County in Georgia, which is part of the growing Atlanta suburbs that are growing in numbers and getting bluer. So it looks like Kamala's doing fairly well there, but very few votes counted. So it's impossible to really know. North Carolina, the vote in is mostly blue, but it's mostly blue areas. So it's really hard to say. I think this mostly looks like it tracks pretty closely with last year, which means it's going to be pretty close. I don't think either of the major candidates really have a chance to really have a reason to panic or celebrate yet.
And I mean, it's pretty stunning just how close this election has been just this whole time, given how deeply unpopular Trump was when he left office. I'm curious, have you been following the betting pools, and do you have any money bet on one of the warmongers in chief?
No. In fact, when we made our predictions, I specifically said I would not bet $1 on this if I could. It's too unpredictable. And in a very strong sense, I feel like both candidates were both the victim of their own failings and the beneficiary of the other candidate, who was also horrible. The idea that Donald Trump is this close to taking the White House again is obviously an embarrassment. But on the Trump side, given the just horrific record of Biden-Harris, it's embarrassing for him that he has to sweat this out too. I mean, it really is. I mean, this really is a doom election. It really is an end of empire kind of a night that we're seeing, because you're just seeing two people who I think are just manifestly unfit competing for who is ostensibly at least the most powerful person to become the most powerful person in the world.
Right. And you and Russell have, just talking about how horrendous both these candidates are of the major parties. You and Russell have strongly supported worker strikebacks, offensive strategy, I should say, this year, where we made it very clear that while the Jill Stein campaign won't be able to win the election or even come close to it, and there's no shot at that, but what we do have is a shot at getting every possible vote for Jill Stein, for the anti-war movement, for the movement against genocide, in order to, and sort of doing that really boldly and audaciously, saying that we are trying to defeat Kamala Harris in Michigan. Can you talk about why you supported us? And also, that a clip from one of my speeches went viral about this, and you covered this, and you've had me on the show. Yeah, if you could share your thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that has to be the attitude of third parties in general, especially under circumstances like this, where, many of us are seeing, over this past year in Gaza, the worst things we've ever seen in our lives, like on a regular basis. Like to think about the trauma of seeing a murdered baby one time, the mark that would leave. To see a dozen murdered babies a day for a year. I mean, it's just unthinkably horrible. It's unspeakably horrible. And so I think under these circumstances, it's especially important to be as oppositional as possible. And this has been a point of frustration with the Greens. I asked Jill Stein about this. I asked her what she thought of your approach. And she was unfortunately kind of defensive and made a point to say that you didn't speak for the Greens. And I'm thinking, why not just embrace that you're costing the Democrats votes, that you're taking votes from them? That gives you more power. It's more of I always say when they blame you for their defeat, they're giving you credit. You have to think of blame as credit. Blame is credit. It's not blame. All right. And so stop thinking that way. And for you to be, I mean, you know, I've followed your work for years before I got to know you, Kshama, but you've always taken that approach. It has been successful. That's the other thing. I mean, you know, I didn't want to start anything. Look, I'm supporting Jill Stein because you guys are and Abandon Harris. I'm doing it in solidarity with Abandon Harris, really, and out of trust for you and what you guys are doing over there. But I asked Jill Stein about your strategy in that speech, and she kind of distanced herself from it, and she said, "Well, you know, I reject her analysis, meaning your analysis." And I'm thinking, and I didn't say this because I'm trying to be supportive. You know, ultimately, I'll take one for the team. But I'm thinking, who are you to reject her analysis? Like, Kshama has actually won as a third-party candidate, which is more than you could say for the goddamn Green Party. Kshama has actually won not only elections, but victories for working people. What does the Green Party want? So what do you mean you reject her analysis? You reject the analysis of one of the only successful third-party politicians in the country, but the Greens, who cannot get 3% to save their life in 40 years, they feel like, no, we're on the right track. So, you know, I bit my tongue about that because ultimately it's not about me getting a hot take in. It's about supporting the movement. And so I tried to be a good soldier. But yeah, I mean, that did bother me. And now that the polls are closing, I feel like I could say that, you know, and I think that's a major failing on their part.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Both of the dimensions that you expressed are really important. One is for us as a movement on the left to know how to bring up our differences and how much to emphasize at a given moment, and at all times keeping the needs of the working class as a whole and the movement as a whole, and in this case specifically working people's movement and the anti-war movement at the center. And in that spirit, yeah, I really appreciate what you said, Keaton, that we have all strongly supported the Jill Stein campaign while also conducting friendly debates about it. And I just wanted to share one anecdote before Emily asks you a question before you have to leave us, which is, you know, when you talked about how, unfortunately for us, unfortunately for the left, unfortunately for American working people, the example that we have shown in Seattle in our decade-long tenure, winning 4 elections, leaving the city council undefeated, is too rare. It's just too rare. It's one of the only rare examples.
Right.
And what you know, and one time, and we you know, to your point, Keaton, the best compliments we got were from our political enemies. And
Right.
One of those times, I remember, Emily will remember this, you know,
Jenny Durkin's brother.
Yes, Jenny Durkin, who was a notorious corporate Democrat mayor of Seattle during the George Floyd protests. Her brother was a lifelong corporate real estate lobbyist. And he said, after he retired, he felt free to say this openly. And he said that the real estate lobby, you know, all these millionaires and billionaire real estate people, they would go to all the Democrats on the city council, coach them on how they should vote, which is vote against our renters' rights bills. But then, according to him, they would come to City Hall, they would face what he called Sawant's army, and then the Democrats would end up voting yes on these bills. That's a case in point. It's a real-life example of what you are talking about, which is blame is credit.
Yeah. I think it was Sawant's Red Army. It was my memory.
Oh,
We all
right.
wore our
You're
red
right.
shirts.
You're right. It's a Red Army. Yes, we'll take that.
But yeah, Keaton, I wanted to ask you. You know, you were at the Democratic National Convention.
Well, my partner was. I wasn't there in person. My partner was there. Oh. But I was covering it with him remotely. Yeah.
Yeah. But you will still remember that the biggest news story at the DNC was, what will the uncommitted delegates do? That was a huge question everyone was asking. Biden and then Harris had both refused to make any real commitment to end the genocide or stop arms shipments to Israel. And of course, unfortunately, uncommitted delegates did not use their position to protest or openly break from Harris and the Democrats' pro-war position. But I'm sure you saw this scandalous article that just came out from the Middle East Eye showing uncommitted accepted nearly $500,000 from a PAC that explicitly barred them from endorsing a candidate other than Harris. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we did a segment. They put out this weird ad a few weeks ago where they were talking about how Project 2025, which is, you know, the new Putin, basically, you know, for, you know, this year. This is what the Democrats are using to fearmonger about. basically talking about how Project 2025 prohibited aid to Gaza, which is not true, by the way. Project 2025 does not mention Gaza by name at all. It mentions Israel 4 times in passing, if you do a search on it. But we could sense something was off there. Like, okay, you're doing an ad where they're not explicitly endorsing Kamala Harris, but they're saying vote against Trump and don't vote for third parties. So that's basically, in not as many words, saying vote for Kamala. And you're really going out of your way to try to shoehorn Project 2025 into this ad where it doesn't really belong. And so I got to give credit to my friend Russ, who'll be joining you guys in about 45 minutes. He said, I think they got paid to do this ad. This ad looks like it was professionally produced. There's Democrat Party talking points. This feels like they were compelled, and by compelled, I mean financed, to do this ad. We didn't have any proof at the time. We didn't make any accusations, but we're saying this smells really funny. And so it was kind of validating to see this article come out where they did get money, because we could kind of see that. They became basically the Sunrise movement of 2024, just like Sunrise in 2020, really presented itself as being very adversarial and oppositional to the Democratic Party. As soon as the primaries wrapped up, you could see they were sort of angling for favorability amongst Biden and his team. And that's what we have here. And it's really, really sad to see, and quite frankly, kind of infuriating to see the cause of a free Palestine be co-opted in that way, especially given what's going on day to day, right? Not that the climate crisis is not real, not that that fight is not important, but it's not as visceral as this right now and as immediate right now. And so, yeah, that was horrible to see, but not surprising, to be honest with you.
Right, exactly. It wasn't surprising. And you used the example of the Sunrise Movement, which is really apt. Another example, I believe we might have talked about this briefly on your show, about how also the Black Lives Matter leaders did similar things, where they took money for their pet NGOs. They got got promises for plum positions in Democratic administrations, even at the city level, and then sold out the movement. Obviously, there's a lot for us to talk about, and also the election results dissecting still has to happen. But we know we need to let you go, because I know you want to get back to your live stream. But yeah, thank you so much, Keaton, for joining us. And hopefully sometime soon we can have you and Russell both for a longer episode.
I would love that. Thanks so much for having me. Always a pleasure. Always have time for you guys. Thank you very much. And Russ will be here about 45 minutes.
In February.
You got it.
Yes, and see you guys in February at the organizing conference.
You got it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks so much to Keaton. And now I believe we have Sam White in our Riverside waiting room.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, Sam. We're joined by Sam White now, who is a worker strike back member in Boston, who has been in Michigan for the past several days, helping with worker strike backs, get out the vote campaign there for Jill Stein. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a bit about what you've been doing in Michigan?
Definitely. So we're live in Dearborn, Michigan right now, which has been the nerve center of worker strikebacks, get out the vote operation for anti-war candidate Jill Stein across the country, because we've had people calling in from all over, worker strikeback members and volunteers from different cities, a lot of them calling into Michigan, but none of that would be possible without the work that we've been doing on the ground here in Dearborn, as well as the surrounding communities, Detroit, Hamtramck, other places as well. We've had thousands of conversations with, just ordinary working class people outside of the masjids, at coffee shops, at grocery stores, different, community locations, talking to, members of the Palestinian community, Lebanese people from Yemen, from Syria. These are people with deep, horrendous personal connections to the violence that we're seeing that is being, committed with the full backing of the Biden and Harris administration. There's people that we talk to who will invite to a rally. They say, yes, I'll go if I'm not grieving somebody else that day. These are the conversations we're having. The mood to punish Harris and the Democrats for their support for this genocide has just been really palpable. And I think a lot of people, just their impulse is to stay home. There's a few people who say they will vote for Trump solely to punish Harris and the Democrats for genocide, but overwhelmingly to stay home. But we have seen really historic support for Jill Stein's campaign. Tons and tons of people saying, of course I'm voting for Jill Stein as the anti-war candidate. But I would say that support is less than the potential, the huge opening there is to break away from the Democratic Party, from Kamala Harris. That's why it's been absolutely essential what we're doing with Workers Strike Back, letting people know that there is an anti-war pro-working class candidate on the ballot, an alternative to both Harris and Trump. Not just letting people know, but organizing every last supporter to get their ballot in, organizing volunteers, and motivating donations to fund the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Sam. That's really exciting to hear. And yeah, Kshama and I were also in Michigan a couple weeks ago, and we came across people who, and you just expressed this sentiment as well, thought they should vote for Trump in order to teach a lesson to Harris and the Democrats. And I saw you interviewed someone wearing a Trump flag earlier today. Can you share with our viewers what Workers Strike Back organizers have been saying in response to that idea?
Definitely. I mean, I think the first thing that we have to say is that Trump is exploiting the anger at Kamala Harris. This is the opening that has been left. I mean, Trump was in Dearborn just the other day at the Great Commoner, which is a popular restaurant on the other side of town. Kamala Harris has not been in Dearborn since the Democratic National Convention, since becoming officially the Democratic nominee, though certainly she has been in other areas of Michigan, this key swing state. So Workers Strike Back has been answering the lies that Trump is supposedly the pro-peace candidate. Trump opened a campaign office in Hamtramck, which is a Muslim-majority suburb of Detroit. The mayor of that all-Muslim city council endorsed Trump, and the signs in the window, and we see these in Dearborn as well, they have a peace dove on them. They say, "Vote peace, vote Trump." And he is managing to get away with that lie because there is no challenge from the Democratic Party, because they cannot answer to the fact that they also are funding genocide. So we have been clarifying what Trump really stands for, that he also is a warmongering representative of the billionaires, that his vision of peace is to, quote unquote, finish the job of genocide in Gaza and expanding the war in Lebanon. And he described himself to AIPAC in 2016 as a lifelong friend and supporter of Israel. And as president, it's not like he doesn't have a record on these questions. As president, he oversaw the signing of the Abraham Accords, where he was responsible for sending $10 billion of funding to Saudi Arabia, and normalizing relationships between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, other countries with Israel, and sending weapons that were used against innocent people in Yemen, who many of whom have family members here in Dearborn and Hamtramck. Trump was responsible for the Muslim ban. He's, and a whole host, of course, of anti-worker policies. I could go on and on and on, but most people see through these lies from Trump and his agenda of divide and conquer. It's very blatant that he's just trying to take advantage of the desire to punish Kamala Harris. So for most people, it's not a very tough sell to when people learn that there is in fact a genuine anti-war candidate on the ballot who calls for an immediate end to all military aid to Israel. It's not a tough sell to switch. And we have flipped many people, not only from Kamala Harris, but also from Donald Trump, to supporting Jill Stein, explaining that there is no lesser evil when there's a genocide happening. This is no better than what Kamala Harris is doing, running ads in different states with different clips from the same speech that she gave at the Democratic National Convention, in Pennsylvania for areas with, a significant Jewish community. She's running the clips of that speech where she says she's a lifelong friend of Israel. Here in Michigan, she's running the clips where she says she thinks it's really horrific what's happened to the Palestinian people. Of course, not saying who's causing that immense suffering and who's funding it, her own administration. So there's this opening for a clean break from both the Democrats and Republicans. The support for Trump is often very shallow. And when people learn that there is an anti-war candidate in the form of Jill Stein, they're often very supportive. It's just a matter of connecting that with momentum to continue this opportunity that we have to break for good from the Democrats and to launch a new anti-war working class party. And when I bring that up in conversations with people, when we talk to people about that need to keep organizing for a new party, people's eyes light up. There's so much agreement with the need to do this, to build a new party that fights for working people in the anti-war movement.
It's all really, really helpful to hear about. And you've covered a lot already, Sam, but do you have anything to add about how Worker Strike Back has been campaigning to build momentum for Jill Stein's anti-war pro-worker campaign in the final days here in Michigan in the last few days?
Definitely. I mean, so I'm back here for a second visit. Actually, I'm visiting from out of town. We have volunteers who've been taking immense amounts of time off of their day jobs to come and talk to every last possible voter, get every last ballot in. There is a certain amount of election fatigue, but every one of these people that says, "Of course, I'm voting for Jill Stein," we need to make sure every one of them did in fact get their ballots in, and we need to connect that to a true movement building strategy, the type of strategy that won victories for working people in Seattle with the tenure of your council office and everything that we've been able to accomplish, from the $15 minimum wage and all the renters' rights victories. So we have to turn this nominal support for Jill Stein into active support by turning out, talking to people about getting their friends, their family members to also get in their ballots, by organizing rallies, by organizing canvassing shifts, signing up volunteers, and there was just so much of that work to do. Even just yesterday at the University of Michigan, we were talking to people. There were so many people that we talked to that still didn't even know that there was an anti-war candidate that Jill Stein was on the ballot, and that we're planning on staying home. So for those who do, we want to activate them. We want to link them to this movement building approach. So often politics just disenfranchises people. They feel powerless. They feel like there's not a space for them in politics. And Worker Strike Back is answering that. We want to continue to build Worker Strike Back in the state of Michigan, and make sure to connect that every single anti-war vote that we've been able to win for Jill Stein is part of continuing this fight to build the anti-war movement. That is the basis for the organizing conference that you were talking about that we're having in February, to launch a new party. This is what it's going to take, this movement building approach, to win the $25 minimum wage, healthcare, housing, all the types of things that Jill Stein's been calling for, that Worker Strike Back is determined to fight for.
Thanks so much, Sam. And yeah, I wanted to ask was, just including bringing people from all across the country who put their lives on hold, as you've spoken to. We've also been mobilizing lots of people on the ground who want to get active, training them as volunteers, and kind of getting them plugged into what it will look like to continue to build the fight beyond just today. I've been saying since until November 5th, but that's today.
Yes, I know.
Can you talk a little bit about Worker Strike Back launching a chapter in Michigan, which I understand is the plan?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take continued organizing. It's going to take continued resources. But the events that we've had, the rally that we had at the beginning of the month with Jill Stein, with Abandon Harris, drew people from all over. It wasn't only people from within Dearborn. This was on October 6th. There's video on the On Strike YouTube channel. A couple hundred people from all over Dearborn packing this hall to hear about this approach. But out of that, I mean, there were people coming from all over. There were we had an auto worker speaking from the other side of Detroit. I mean, there's so much in Detroit, which carries so much of the legacy of the betrayals of the Democratic Party, of the of big business and the political establishment not having anything to answer for working people. There's a real hunger for the type of approach that is baked into everything that we do with Worker Strike Back. So we've definitely had a lot of interest. We've been able to turn out, I don't know the exact number, but quite a lot of volunteers to come out on tabling shifts with us, to organize these events and phone banking. All of this is the basis for continuing to organize. We have a great crew of people that we've been talking to, people who are grappling with everyday new horrors of losing family members in Lebanon, in Palestine, who still are, I think because of that, right, are energized to fight and to keep organizing, and that will be the basis to keep organizing in Michigan and across the country.
Really, really exciting and extremely important. And I think it shows how serious we've been in Worker Strike Back, and also how serious ordinary people are about actually doing something good, actually ending the genocide and fighting for working people. In fact, when we were in Michigan as well, Emily, I remember we ran into working people there outside the masjids. Of course, for them, the genocide was the paramount issue. But when we would talk about working class issues like $15 an hour, Medicare for all, they would strongly agree about it. And
$25 an hour.
Yes, and we would get corrected. They'd say, wait, we want $25 an hour. Exactly. And all of this leads me to hopefully you're able to stay with us for one more question, Sam. I know you have a lot going on there. Is you mentioned Detroit, and you said a little bit about it. Can you expand on that and tell us why, in your view, is Detroit significant?
I mean, there's so many levels to that question, to the significance of Detroit. I mean, for starters, Michigan is ground zero for this election. I think as the results start to come in, Michigan is ground zero. Like there is so much about Detroit and its suburbs, multiple of which have very significant Muslim and Arab American populations that could play a significant role in deciding the outcome of this presidential election. But Dearborn and Hamtramck, these are not only crucial centers for the diaspora of communities from Palestine, from Lebanon, from many other countries as well. These are also sites with a huge amount of really important class struggle history. I mean, the auto industry, the auto unions, the United Auto Workers, this crucial union that that passed a ceasefire resolution, but of course we've had on guests talking about the complete contradiction of Sean Fain, the president of that union, then endorsing Kamala Harris. The whole basis for that union was it was the independent action of working people, the momentous battles of the working class that led to the formation of those unions in the 30s, and then also the civil rights struggle in the 60s and 70s, having a particular expression in the auto plants. And here in Dearborn and the areas we've been staying in, there are neighborhoods that we'll be canvassing, and where there's 2 or 3 different UAW local union halls within a short walk of where we're talking to people. So this is a place where working people linked up with the anti-war movement in the past during the Vietnam War era. There've been these massive radical movements and anti-racist struggles within the auto plants themselves. The Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, DRUM, is an important struggle that happened in the area of Detroit. So all of that struggle is there, and also just the hollowing out of the city of Detroit has so much to do with the fact that politics has been controlled by these big business parties that have no answer to working people, that have withdrawn their investment in response to struggle, and that's why it's so important that these that struggle, whether it's among auto workers, the anti-war movement, that it takes a political expression, that we organize that we take this momentum to and I think we're doing this with Worker Strike Back, giving a cohesive direction to this, involving people in these struggles that draw together auto workers, that draw together Black struggle with the anti-war movement, and this has been reflected in all the conversations we're having, directing that toward launching a new working class party of the anti-war movement that can genuinely fight for all of the things that working people need, instead of war and genocide and endless money and weapons sent to Israel.
Thank you so much, Sam, for standing out in the dark. I'm sure it's probably pretty cold in Michigan as well. And yeah, thanks for joining us. And yeah, we're going to start talking about some of the results that are rolling in, and we just appreciate you joining us from Michigan. So have a great night, Sam.
Thanks so much, guys.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like I have to make the appeal after Sam just made that pitch about just the incredible work that we're doing in Michigan, that please, if you're watching this in Michigan or any other state, frankly, take a moment to join Worker Strike Back. Right now, actually, if you join at $10 a month membership dues, we are sending out our pamphlet on the genocide in Gaza and how that relates to
and the strategy to end the war.
Of course, essentially the strategy to end the war and how the election campaign is part of that. So can get very much caught up on the strategy and the work that we've been doing for the last few months. Anyone who signs up to be a member for $10 a month, we're sending that out to immediately. So really just want to make that appeal that people go to workerstrikeback.org/join. But yeah, do we want to kick off some discussion on some of the results that are rolling in?
It looks like some results are rolling in. The first states we see: Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, West Virginia, and Florida have all been called for Trump by significant margins, as expected. Harris so far has also won the states that she was expected to, which is Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Maryland. And Florida was a key state to watch, where Trump was expected to easily win, which he did. And you want to talk about Georgia, Emily? What we're hearing about Georgia?
Yeah, Georgia is likely to be the first swing state to be called. All eyes are kind of on Georgia in a certain way. Trump is expected to win, though it's not at all guaranteed. Georgia could be a real indication of who has the momentum in these final days. Trump is currently leading in Georgia with 56.9% to 42%, with 36% of the votes counted. So still a substantial, over half still needing to be counted. And we'll continue to monitor that important state throughout the evening. One thing that is notable that we should talk about in terms of polling on the anti-war vote is the most recent poll, which, Kshama, you mentioned this in the intro, from Muslim Americans by CAIR, the Council of American Islamic Relations, which found that Jill Stein had a slight lead over Kamala Harris among Muslim American voters, and both of them significantly beating Donald Trump. Hopefully we are able to show that graphic. And yeah, you can see that Stein had 42.3 versus 41% for Kamala Harris. This is absolutely remarkable for the left, a third-party candidate to be essentially tied with.
And this is a community that has traditionally, overwhelmingly, as we said before, voted Democratic Party. This is a huge thing. I mean, we've had, people like Rizwan Samad, who is a member of Abandon Harris here in Seattle, who said that I've been a lifelong Democrat since the 80s, and I'm breaking with them because I'm angry.
I mean, and that's so many people that we spoke to. I mean, we had that interview with someone who just ran as a Democrat this year, right? And still giving that searing indictment of the two-party system and just calling them out for the sort of hollow attacking working class people sort of mechanism of the billionaires that they are.
Exactly. And, there's obviously more to talk about that. And also in terms of results, Emily, I know we were going to talk about the abortion rights ballot measures, many of which are, I believe millions of voters are going to be voting on that or have voted on that in 10 different states. And I don't think we have all the results. I think it's going to be at least an hour from now when we'll have most of the results on abortion ballot measures. However, we do have somebody who has been looking at that closely. So can we bring in Willow Reeder into the room here? So yeah, we have Willow Reeder here, who is a member of Workers Strike Back, who has been studying the abortion rights ballot measures, as I said. And of course, we'll discuss the results in more detail later on, but we're really delighted to have you here, Willow. Welcome.
I can't hear Willow.
We're not able to hear you, Willow.
Oh,
we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, as you know, Willow, millions of voters are expected to have voted directly on the question of abortion access, right? There's sort of circumventing useless politicians in ballot measures in 10 different states. The final New York Times Siena College election poll released just 2 days ago showed that for women and younger voters, abortion actually surpassed the economy as the most important issue driving votes in the final days of the election. Can you give us a rundown of what results we are seeing so far?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's a little too soon to say for most states, but we do so far have some preliminary results from Florida, and it's really, really tight. It's coming in at 57.2% yes on the ballot question, which would create a constitutional right to abortion. Unfortunately, it needs 60% to pass. And we are expecting to see more results from more states later on this evening.
And in addition to being a member of Worker Strike Back Willow, you're also a member of Revolutionary Workers, and you recently wrote an article for the Revolutionary Workers website in which you say, as a fig leaf to cover her move to the right, the Harris campaign has made abortion rights a central feature of their campaign messaging. I wanted to play, just in relation to this, I wanted to play a video clip and get your response.
So let me take a minute to help folks, especially the men in our lives, to get a better sense of what could happen if we keep dismantling parts of our reproductive care system piece by piece, as Trump intends to do. I want folks to understand the chilling effect, not just on critical abortion care, but on the entirety of women's health, all of it. There are good reasons why so many women and physicians are horrified by what's happened since Donald Trump's justices overturned Roe v. Wade. We're seeing women scrambling across state lines to get the care they need. Just this week, a major medical journal reported that after Roe was overturned, infant mortality in this country rose, in large part because women are being forced to carry fetuses that won't survive to term. So just imagine the profound effects for all of us if Donald Trump wins this election. In states that are already putting abortion bans into effect, his FDA could further outlaw patchwork systems of telehealth appointments and mail order pills, thereby eliminating the last remaining protections for women in those states. He could take actions that effectively ban abortion nationwide, which would put all of us in danger, no matter what state we live in. We will see more doctors hesitating or shying away from providing life-saving treatments because they are worried about being arrested. More medical students reconsidering even pursuing women's health at all. More OB/GYN clinics without enough doctors to meet demand closing their doors, leaving untold numbers of women in communities throughout this country without a place to go for basic gynecological care, which in turn will leave millions of us at risk of undiagnosed medical issues like cervical and uterine cancers. This is real. So do you think Donald Trump is thinking about the consequences for the millions of women who will be living in medical deserts? Does anyone think he has the emotional maturity and foresight to come up with a plan to protect us? Y'all, we are teetering on the edge. Even before these state bans, America was already lagging behind every other wealthy nation on measures like maternal mortality and paid leave.
Democratic Party on abortion rights?
It is infuriating to hear Michelle Obama essentially blame working class men for the attacks on abortion rights. She describes patchwork systems and medical deserts as if these are solely the result of Trump's policies. I grew up in a medical desert where many people had to travel over an hour to get to the nearest emergency room. And Barack Obama ran on a promise to change that. But instead of enacting universal health care, he imposed an individual mandate on private health insurance, doing the bidding of big pharma and the insurance corporations. He bailed out Wall Street and the banks during the Great Recession in 2011 and allowed untold suffering to be inflicted on working class and poor Americans with massive job losses and millions of home foreclosures. He carried out one austerity measure after another, and the patchwork only got patchier. And at the end of that clip, Michelle said, even before bans, America was lagging behind every other wealthy nation on maternal mortality and paid leave. Again, implying that this is specifically the result of Trump's first term, but the US has lagged behind all developed countries for decades. And both the Republican and Democratic parties were responsible for this. The maternal mortality rate in the United States has increased year over year between 2000 and 2021, including Obama's 8 years in office. And the US is the only high income country that doesn't guarantee paid leave after childbirth. And the Democrats have really taken the same let the states decide approach to this that we're now seeing with abortion, with only 13 states in the US have paid family and medical leave programs today. So the Democratic Party, despite all the times that they've held all three branches of government over the decades since Roe passed, sometimes with super majorities in the House and the Senate, they refuse to codify Roe v. Wade into law. And so now, they're saying, Trump's ban, right, and that Trump could potentially expand that to a nationwide ban. But it was really, it was the Democrats' failure to codify this as a constitutional right that has created what we're seeing today.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think important history lesson, as as usual, the Democratic Party trying to sort of paper over their own actual legacy, and of course, in terms of any kind of legacy or space that might exist between the two corporate parties, I'm curious what you think, what commitment we can actually expect from a Harris presidency, given how she has made people like Liz Cheney a centerpiece of her election campaign. As we mentioned earlier this evening, that's the same Liz Cheney who has a long track record of opposing abortion rights, who celebrated and praised the Supreme Court when it struck down Roe v. Wade, but now claims that Trump is going too far, though, of course, Trump himself, because of huge pressure of how popular abortion rights are, has, essentially said this, like, let the states decide position, and has not, been the open sort of attack dog on abortion rights that they're portraying him to be. But I think, yeah, I'm just curious what you think we could expect from a Harris presidency.
Right. I mean, the short answer, frankly, is that we can't expect any commitment from Harris on any of her promises to working people. The only commitments that I think we can expect Harris to uphold over the next 4 years, if she's elected, are her commitments to big business, to billionaires, to the oil lobby, and to Israel's genocidal war. As I pointed out in the article that you mentioned, Harris has moved further and further to the right. Donald Trump joked on the debate stage that he should send her a MAGA hat, and he's not wrong. She's trying to solidify the Democratic Party as the party of the ruling class and of the rich conservatives who want more predictability than Trump can offer. And on that goal, she's had enormous success. She's gotten the backing of nearly 100 of the top business executives since her coronation in July. But on the issue of abortion, at best, I think we could expect to see more of what has been described as aggressive incrementalism over the last 4 years. Harris would undoubtedly call press conferences further condemning rollbacks of our rights state by state, while simultaneously refusing to use any of the powers available to her in our nation's highest office. And I have to say, it's pretty stunning to see Harris and the Democrats claim to be the standard bearers for abortion rights, while at the same time touting their shameful alliance with blatantly anti abortion Republicans like Liz Cheney and promising that they'll have a Republican in the cabinet if Harris wins.
So all of this brings us to then the all-important question, which is, what is the strategy needed for winning abortion rights? And of course, I think part of the question, a dimension of that question is, when we do win abortion rights, it's snatched away from us. So that's part of the question as well. And in relation to everything that you and Emily just talked about, does the route to abortion rights lie through the Democratic Party? And I'm going to guess what you're going to say, but go ahead.
No, to answer that question, I think it's really important to look at how Roe v. Wade was won in the first place, right? Like it was won during the Nixon administration, and despite a conservative Supreme Court dominated by Nixon appointees, it was the power of our movements, of working people taking to the streets, that forced major victories like Roe v. Wade, like the end of the Vietnam War. But it wasn't just through large protests and demonstrations. Of course, that was important. But if that were enough, then we'd have far more to show. For example, the Black Lives Matter uprisings. There were two really crucial components of strategy that I think we urgently need to learn from and apply in our movements today. One was that the movements happened at a time when there was this huge anger in American society at both the Democratic and Republican parties. A big reason that the movements became powerful enough to win these historic victories was precisely because they were organizing independently of both parties of the ruling class. And this posed a real threat. These victories weren't given by Nixon, but they were forced from him and from the capitalist class by working people becoming a threat to the system. And I think related to that is the other factor, which was militant rank and file labor action, including major strikes to shut down the profit machine of capitalism. As part of this fight back, rank and file leadership refused to be tied to the Democratic Party. And I think we can see today how, just the opposite is true, right? These illusions in the Democrats, the fact that most of the labor leadership is tied at the hip to the Democratic Party, that they've been cheering on Kamala Harris despite her support for the Gaza genocide. This is all a real obstacle to organizing movements that are strong enough to force concessions. And many working people and young people at the time were also beginning to draw the conclusion that actually we need to break from capitalism itself, that we need socialism, that fighting for reforms just won't be enough. And because even though this historic reform of Roe was won, it's now been snatched from us by the ruling class, as you say. And that's why, in addition to getting active with Workers Strike Back, I'm also helping to build revolutionary workers. In more recent history, I think we can look to your example, Kshama, and the Socialist City Council office that we held in Seattle. When I talk to people about Workers Strike Back demands, they sometimes say things like, well, those sound great and all, but don't you need to compromise and negotiate to be able to win anything? And I understand where this question comes from, right? Because that's what the Democratic Party tells us over and over again. We really want to win this thing for you, really we do, but the mean Republicans, they just won't let us, right? And they say, just vote blue harder next time, okay? But that's just really not how Kshama did things, right? And you didn't negotiate or compromise with the
To be
Democrats.
clear, right, and I was just going to, sorry to interrupt you, but I was going to say that actually that excuse that, oh, it's the big bad Republicans wouldn't even fly in Seattle because it's 8 Democrats and we were 1 socialist. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Exactly. And you didn't compromise or negotiate with them, right? You didn't do these backdoor deals or try to convince them or water down what you were fighting for. You used your position as this platform to build social movements. We mobilized people to City Hall to give public comments and made the Democrats choose, right? Side with your rich donors and lose re-election or reluctantly back down. And I think, that's how we won the first abortion sanctuary in the country and full funding for all abortion needs in the city. And what made, your office and our work in Seattle so powerful was precisely because we have this Marxist analysis of capitalism. It's no coincidence that socialists make the best fighters for reforms because we understand how the system is stacked against us. And we understand that we can't put our faith in the parties of capitalism, whether in Seattle or in Washington, D.C. And so lastly, we need to combine the fight for reproductive rights with the fight for universal health care. I think if Bernie's run proved anything, it's how incredibly popular this would be. A 2020 exit poll in Florida, where Trump ran, won by a landslide, found that 75% of voters supported Medicare for all. So, an on strike has covered how Canada and Western European countries won public health care because of militant labor fight back, linked with building working class parties, in part led by revolutionary socialists, that posed a real challenge to the parties of capitalism. So, no, the route to abortion rights does not lie within the Democratic Party. The strategy that's needed is just the opposite. The labor movement and young people breaking from both major parties and organizing independently for these popular demands that neither is going to concede without a fight. And I think, just to plug, like, I think that's why I'm so excited to be part of the organizing conference that we're holding in February of next year to really begin to lay the groundwork for that decisive break from the Democratic Party.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Willow. And I look forward to seeing you at the organizing conference. I think it's going to be important to have, voices on all of the issues that you raised. And yeah, just really appreciate you joining us. I've also, on one of the points that you raised that I think really connects is, that we didn't just, we don't just have to fight Republicans. We had to fight the Democrats to win, not just abortion rights, but it's not just a question of do you have the right to get an abortion, but can you actually afford to access one is a huge barrier for many working class people who need abortion care. And through Kshama's office, we won funding to fund all abortions that happen here in Seattle through taxing big business, through taxing Amazon. And I think, that was one of those victories that happened in a sort of flurry at the end of your council office. And I think in terms of when we talk about what are the Democrats delivering on abortion rights? They are definitely
It's a
not.
stark contrast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also connects to the point for the need for strike action for Medicare for all. That it's not just a question of, do you have the hollow right, but can you actually access it? Is it something that is accessible for all? And that strike action is frankly going to need to come from rank and file bottom up organizing, because we have seen, from Sarah Nelson, from, Sean Fain, who you've called out that history will judge him, that they've just been full throated support for Harris and the Democrats, despite their failures to stand up for the things that we need. But I think we're going to go to another segment soon.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Willow. And we'll see you in February. We're going to have Russell Daubler from New Dissidents very soon. But before that, we have an interesting segment from a video clip that featured. It's like a tale of two Matts. Like there's Matt Lee, who's a reporter for the Associated Press. He was in the White House press briefing, I believe, yesterday, and he asked a question to Matthew Miller of the Biden administration, and here is how it went. Can we play that? Yeah.
Video clip lined up. Thank you for joining us for our first live stream event from the studio. But while we work on getting that ready, we actually have a really exciting montage that we pulled together of the work that we've done on the ground in Michigan, interviewing people coming out from the polling stations. We've pulled together some of the exciting material that our on-strike correspondents, including Sam, have helped pull together. So we're going to roll that footage, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
My name is Noor. I'm actually a junior at Henry Ford Early College, and I'm from Palestine.
Can you tell us, if you were going to be voting in this election, who would you be voting for and what's at stake for you?
Definitely Jill Stein. I feel like since there was only like Kamala and Trump, like I was just gonna vote Green. But then after hearing everything that Jill has been like talking about, I feel like she's probably the best candidate, because I feel like she's trying to actually end the war while they're just trying to like push it aside and like not really doing anything about it.
What do you think about, when you are eligible to vote, when you come of age, about having a party of working people to be a part of?
Yeah, I think that's great, honestly. Yeah.
So my name is Thuraya Jozaila. I'm from Yemen. I study here in General Studies in Henry Ford College.
And if you were going to be voting in this election, who would you be voting for?
Not Kamala Harris and not Trump. I don't want them.
My mom voted for her.
Uh-huh.
I don't know, cause like she didn't like Kamala Harris. She didn't like Kamala Harris, and she didn't like Trump, cause they both doing the same thing. So Jill Stein, I'm pretty sure my mom voted for that, cause like when Kamala Harris was with Joe Biden, they were doing the same thing. So what would we expect from them right now? So I'm pretty sure like my mom's friend group been doing that.
I'm absolutely voting for Jill Stein. I will die on that hill, and I will die for Jill Stein. If you are going to be arrested at a Palestinian protest when you're running for presidency, I think you have my vote, and you will forever have my vote.
You've literally convinced me. I'm voting for Jill Stein tomorrow. Because, okay, I was interviewed by like an Italian news broadcast like 2 weeks ago, and I told them I was voting for Jill Stein. But then I saw that everybody else like did not want to be interviewed. Like they absolutely did not want anything to do with politics. The whole full ass cafe, no one wanted to be interviewed. They kept asking around. I was thinking, is there just not enough support in general? But maybe that's not enough reason for me to give up my own beliefs. I'm just like, I guess everybody's scared of a Trump presidency as how it's going to screw everybody over. And like, again, that you're always using that against us. Like you're scared of Trump, you're scared of Republicans.
So you're a member of Workers Strike Back, and On Strike is a production of Workers Strike Back, and we are calling for a new party. We think that this election, and particularly the support for Jill Stein as an anti-war candidate in a time when both the Democrats and the Republicans are supporting and bankrolling genocide, and that war will continue no matter which of the two corporate warmongers ends up in the White House. And yet we still need to vote for Jill Stein anyway to lay the steps for a new party. What do you think it would mean to build that, and are you supportive of that call? What does that mean to you?
Of a new party? Absolutely, I'm very supportive of it. What it means to me is that finally we're going to have an opportunity to not have priorities of death and destruction in order to fill our pockets. So I hope that a workers' party, because that's what it would be essentially, is a workers' party. I hope that it's going to affect the workers positively.
I don't think Trump or Kamala Harris should be winning, because both of them fund wars that's happening, and the money they're using for the war we could be using to help benefit our country instead of bombing innocent children and innocent people in Gaza and Lebanon. And a lot of everyone here in Dearborn is mostly Arab, and they can see like we can all as a community come together and understand how heartbreaking this is. That's why we should vote for Jill, so she can help end the war instead of fund the war and cause more destruction when it's just heartbreaking to see.
And what would you say to people about how Donald Trump was just in Dearborn, to the people that are supporting him? What would you say to them?
I would say that you shouldn't support him because he just came to Dearborn, came to the Great Commoner to get your votes. But we all know at the end of the day, he's just going to go do the same thing that Kamala Harris is going to do, and he's going to fund the war. He's going to keep on giving money to Israel when we could be using it to help our country instead of bombing other countries for no reason. Like, it's disgusting. That's why why would you even vote for him? He's literally hating, he's like hate criming your kind. He's just manipulating you guys to vote for him.
So will you be voting for Jill Stein?
Yeah.
Interesting to watch from so many Arab and Muslim people, including students at the universities. And now we have Russell Dobler from Due Dissidents, I believe, is in the waiting room. Can we bring him in?
Hello.
Hi, Russell.
How you doing, Kshama?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right.
My co-host Emily MacArthur is here with me. I don't know if you've met her, but
We have
just
not
wanted to
met.
introduce you guys.
All right. Good to meet you.
Yeah. So, we just talked to Keaton, but what's your feeling about the election results?
Our prediction has been that Kamala will end up winning. Right now, the numbers coming in are pretty much like the polling has been. Very, very difficult to read the tea leaves. But that's our story. So far, we're sticking to it. We haven't been given any reason to reevaluate it, with the proviso that we've said the whole time you could make a case for it to go either way. And in hindsight, no matter how it goes, it's going to seem obvious. You could make a very strong case for why a deep state avatar like Kamala couldn't win in the end. And you could make a case for the idea that the Trump campaign managed to out weird some very weird people, and they couldn't win. Like I could definitely see it breaking either way. Given the data points that we do have regarding how elections have gone post Dobbs generally, the early female vote, that kind of thing, I'm inclined still to think that it's going to wind up being Kamala, and I think that the Trump campaign was very manosphere, very online, very, as Megyn Kelly said, very brotastic, and I think it's a turnoff to too many normies, and normies vote disproportionately.
That's a hot take. Speaking of
That's
the
the
normie
hot
vote, I'm
take.
kind of curious. What is this like Cthulhu Republican Democrat hybrid shirt thing that you're wearing?
All right, so this is I had to wear this tonight because it's going to instantly become dated tomorrow. This is Cthulhu 2024, the greater of all evils. So, yeah,
Pro
that is
genocide.
I've been wearing it
Yes.
all through the campaign season. I
And I
also
think,
have
yeah,
I have
go ahead.
a women throwing swords from Ponds 2024 T-shirt. Reference, of course, to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I went
I
with
was just thinking
Cthulhu tonight.
also,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, going with Cthulhu. I think that is the highlight of everything that's happening, the greater of two evils. And also, what you were describing about how close the race is, it really is. There couldn't be a more statistically sound testament to how horrible both of these candidates
Oh
are and
yeah.
how
Oh
horrible
yeah.
their parties are.
Something that I have noticed, I come out of a theater background, so like my Facebook social media was very much built on when I was marketing my theater shows. So it's very much a lib crowd. I always say the only reason I even have Facebook anymore is to drive people insane with my observations. And I'll say I've seen since Hillary, like Hillary, man, they were all about that. They were all about that. Oh, yeah, it's time and glass ceiling and all that. With Biden, they were much quieter about Biden. This time, you've got a few of them that will do that whole dance. I'm voting for choices on the ballot, and this isn't a lesser of two evils voted. Let's get it right this time. We again have an intelligent, qualified. Well, you got a few of them do that shit. Nothing like the scale of that you had with Hillary. Like at this point, it's only the dumbest of the dumb. It's only people who are so lacking in a personality that if they were not virtue signaling, they wouldn't have anything to say. Who are still doing that thing, who are still doing that, yeah, vote blue and stop the orange Cheeto, and much, much less of it than you would expect. Like very little. Yeah, it's cringe, but I gotta say, man, out of like the libiest libs I know, that genocide thing, man, like they don't want to have to answer for that. They really don't. Like they may be voting for Kamala quietly, but they can't get their heart in it like they did in the past. Most of them, with a few really brain dead exceptions. And I think
Yeah,
that
we
speaks to what you're saying. It's two such terrible choices.
Yeah, I mean, I was at a mosque in Detroit, and we saw Rashida Tlaib speak just 2 weeks
Mm.
ago, and you would think in that space that she would be full-throatedly telling people to get out the vote, how important this election is, and
Right.
she didn't
Yeah.
mention the election at all.
Wow.
And I think that's just sort of telling, just that people don't want to talk about it. It's sort of
I mean, these leaders don't want to.
the leaders,
so-called leaders.
yeah, the leaders don't want to talk about it. I actually wanted to ask you, because I think there's sort of, you mentioned the support that we're seeing largely amongst women and young voters, potentially swinging the election in favor for Kamala Harris. But there's
Mhm.
an interesting phenomenon happening in Florida where Trump was expected to win, and his numbers are extremely strong there. But there's
Mhm.
also an abortion measure that's on
Mhm.
the ballot that it may not
Right.
clear this sort of undemocratic 60%
Right,
threshold, but right now it's at
60%,
about
yeah.
50. It's at 57% or so. So
Hmm.
big support, enough support that if people
Mhm.
who were supporting abortion voted for Kamala Harris, then she would have won that state. So I wonder if you could kind of give your read of the tea leaves of that sort of this strong support for the abortion
Progressive measures.
progressive measure in Florida, but then also the support for Trump.
We've seen that before. I mean, we've seen that. We saw that in the last election where you had people who were in deep red states voting for marijuana legalization, and very liberal, raising the minimum wage while still voting for Republican. It's branding. It's branding. Once people are really committed to a particular political party or a particular political figure, they have a tendency to just stick with that. That's why they had Camel Joe as a mascot for Camel cigarettes until the courts made them stop, because they knew if you get the kids, if you get them branded from an early age, they'll be smoking Camels the rest of their lives. It's the same thing. If you're that ingrained, that I remember years ago, people were infuriated with those kids who had had that encounter with the Native Americans on the steps of the Capitol, and they wanted to dox these kids. They were all kind of MAGA kids, like 16 years old. And I said, these kids are no different than the kids marching in a pride parade in Chelsea. They are a product of their environment, just like those kids are. If you're from these kind of very red states and counties, that's your whole world. You can have a different view on abortion, which most Republicans do. Most Republicans don't agree with that extremist position on abortion. So yeah, you can vote that and still say, but I'm never voting for a Democrat. I'm never supporting a Democrat. You can still have differences with the Democrats, the party, and particularly so much of this at this point by design, I think, is all comes down to cultural signaling and cultural identification. You could disagree with the Republicans on abortion and still feel more cultural identification with them. You're
To your point, it's. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I do.
Yeah. To your point, it's the situation really, I mean, in this sort of, again, it's the proof of how deeply unpopular both parties are, that people who vote for Trump are voting for Trump as the lesser evil because they hate the Democrats, and many people, I'm not talking about the wealthy, whatever, people who don't really need things to progress in the way that working people and poor people need to. But then you have working class people supporting the Democratic Party because they believe that's the lesser evil compared to the Republicans, and they're both right. That's the
Right.
problem, in the sense that,
Right.
I mean, they're both right and wrong in the sense that neither
Right.
of them works, but their logic of sort of feeling like you have to oscillate between the two makes sense when working people don't have an alternative. And in fact, this example that you mentioned, Emily, reminded me of actually Florida again in 2022. I'm sure, Russ, you remember in 2022 elections, midterm elections, Ron DeSantis won his re-election
Yep.
by a blowout.
Yep.
And at the same in the same election, big minimum wage increase ballot measure passed, and it passed the 60% threshold, the undemocratic threshold. So again, another example of how people, when you talk about issues, people are progressive, the majority of people, but then it shows that the two parties don't offer anything really.
Well,
and
this is why I've always felt, and I think the data and I think the political history demonstrates this pretty well. Neoliberalism and the Democratic Party, which has really embraced it, they run on the premise that has really been sold by the media, all evidence to the contrary, that we live in a country that is economically conservative, that people are really economically conservative, but socially liberal. So you get all these, supposedly liberal media figures will go out as if that's the height of wisdom. All right, Trevor Noah, when he got the Daily Show job, they asked him his politics. Oh well, I'm cult socially liberal and economically conservative. This is supposed to be the Rosetta Stone of economics and politics. And the reality, and a lot of people on the left, like the real left, don't want to hear this either. The country is actually more culturally conservative and economically liberal. And that's where a lot of times you'll see people will vote to raise the minimum wage, but they'll vote for Republicans because very often they don't like a lot of the cultural stances that the Democratic Party emphasizes. Um, so really, in a lot of ways, the Democrats run on exactly the opposite of what the country is. And I think the greatest evidence for that was Trump 2016. Because whatever the reality was, whatever the truth of it was, that's pretty much what he ran on. Yeah, we're going to have beautiful health care. We're going to have a big, beautiful health plan. He ran to Hillary's right on economics. He ran to her left, rather, on economics, on war, and this culturally conservative kind of a message, and he won. He won on that. If the Republicans actually dropped the abortion thing, that is a cultural area where they're on the wrong side of the public, and actually adopted economically progressive policies, they'd win in a landslide everywhere. You'd never be able to beat them if they ran like that, but they don't because they're in the pocket of their own corporate donors, of their own military industrial complex patrons, who they're answering to as well. Like the idea that Trump and Musk, that these guys are rebels, it's the most absurd thing. There was just, we covered this. Elon, these Silicon Valley guys go by this move fast, break things ethos, right? They're gonna hack canvassing. What does that usually mean? Exploitation. That's what that means to them. How do we squeeze more labor out of people for less money? And that's exactly what they did. Canvassing, which is usually kind of a labor of love, it's a passion. No, they got people to sign NDAs. Then they told them they were working for Trump after they had signed the NDAs. And they threw these people in the back of U-Haul vans with no seats because they didn't want to have to pay for Ubers to drive them around because it's not a labor of love. So you don't have what you would normally have on canvassing. People volunteer their cars. People volunteer their transportation. You find somebody in the carpool. They didn't have any of that. So they came up with a corporate solution to it, which sounds like the canvassing version of working down in the salt mines. So the idea that these guys, you got Elon the week before the election, he's saying, yeah, no, Trump wins, there's going to be an economic crash because they're going to cut the budget and everything. Who do you think they do that for? It doesn't mention anything about cutting the military. Only talks about cutting Social Security, cutting Medicaid. The idea of working people thinking that they represent them. And this is not, I'm not making a case for Kamala. but Kamala is running as the establishment candidate. I'm just making a case. The idea that these guys, Trump and Vance and Elon Musk, would piss on a worker if they were on fire is absurd. The idea of people thinking they're coming, that if they got elected, yeah, they're really going to help you. Of course not. So there is, I mean, to your point, there is no choice for working people in this election.
I mean, I've read some about this canvassing operation that you're talking about from Elon Musk, and we've seen, I think, a little bit of worker rebellion against these conditions. I've seen that like hundreds of the doors that were supposedly knocked, were logged miles away while they were hanging out at a diner or something. So, we're sort of seeing this pushback against some kind of hacking of canvassing. But I also wanted to, I think, weigh in on, I think it's important for us, like, as we're trying to build the movement, to refrain from saying that like working class people are necessarily like socially conservative, even if they end up voting that way, because I think the ruling class is so invested in they found that it's extremely effective, but they are very invested in divide and rule. They found it to be an extremely effective tactic for them. I mean, we're seeing that this election in spades with Donald Trump really hammering on about the dangers of immigration. And why is that? Is it because immigrants in this country are dangerous in some way? Absolutely not. It's because Donald Trump has no answer to the cost of living crisis that working class people are facing, the declining living standards. And so there's sort of this bait and switch, just like we saw with Jim Crow, right? And so I don't think that like racism or homophobia or sexism are inherent to
I'm
working
not
class
saying that.
communities.
I'm from those
Yeah.
communities, and I've always spoken out
Yeah.
against that. I think some of the positions that have come out of academia, really, what would have been very fringe ideas that have taken hold as part of the kind of liberal branding at this point, are too extreme for a lot of people. But if you're talking about basic ideas like what we were just talking about, they vote to raise the minimum wage, they vote to legalize marijuana. In terms of immigration, yeah, is it a product of capitalism pitting people against each other? Sure, sure. But nonetheless, working people will tend to have conservative ideas about immigration because they feel that their jobs are threatened. And that is very easy to play on. That's why I say, if Trump could run on that immigration message, and at the same time, if he were running on universal health care, if he were putting in those kind of universal education, but running on that culturally, he'd be unbeatable. Like whether you like it or not, he'd be unbeatable. But that's not real. But the first time he kind of ran on that without promising anything. That's what I'm saying. That's a big part of why he run. He vaguely nodded to the idea that he was going to do those kinds of things without ever getting specific. We're gonna have a big, beautiful health plan. You're gonna, right? He never said no. You're gonna bootstrap your way into healthcare. If he had said that, he probably would have lost. But that's not what he told people.
I think, I think that both parties use what what we hear as wedge issues in order to confuse people, as you were saying, Emily.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, yeah, and to your point, Russell, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats, neither Harris nor Trump, are going to make those promises because they know that they have no intention of keeping them. They serve the billionaire class, and in fact. You wrote in your recent Substack piece about how the real objection that the ruling class, the capitalist class, has to Trump is not that he attacks ordinary people and working people, not that he brought the Muslim ban, but the fact or any of his actual attacks on working people and vulnerable communities. It's that he doesn't play by the book of the capitalist state, and that he's a rogue element, that he's unpredictable. And in reality, neither of these two entities, these two parties, supports any of us, whether it's working people's economic rights, as you were saying, or the actual rights of women. For example, we just had somebody, on this show, Willow Reader, worker strike back member from Boston, was talking about how the Democrats have completely sold out on abortion rights, but they use it as a battering ram
Oh yeah.
in
Oh
order
yeah.
to keep this sort of, so it's a pseudo debate, right? The Republicans and the
Sure.
Democrats, it's a pseudo debate. So Trump uses the battering ram of demonizing working class and poor immigrants, and the Democrats keep using the battering ram of abortion rights, but neither of them has done a thing for working people or for abortion rights.
Yes.
And and then just on your thing about immigration, I was just going to say that, I mean, you say you contended that, if Trump supported economic policies, progressive policies, but had a similarly regressive view on immigration, he might win, or you said he would win, and that may be true. At the end of the day, though, if you look at the history of these divisive issues, immigrants versus people who have been here for a long while, men versus women, or LGBTQ versus others, black versus white. All of these issues, I mean, the history of all of these issues shows that progress has been made on these issues, not by relying on Democrats or Republicans, but actually working people coming together. Like, the whole Jim Crow would not have ended had it not been for the labor movement recognizing that actually we are all under the boot of the same bosses, and so we need to unite. And the formation of the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, was a key point in that. I'm sure you know about that.
Well, this, I think, is really going to be the challenge for left movements going forward. And I think a lot of us, I don't know how you feel, I am really looking forward to this farce of an election being over so we can get to serious business. Because this is not serious. It's a distraction. It's two ruling class parties fighting over which part of the ruling class is going to sit in the big iron throne for the next few years. And neither one of them are really going to help working people. We have got so much work to do in undoing the way that the working class has been misdirected and miseducated. You look at, I said, I come out of a theater background, and I look at what's become of that community, and they have been so brainwashed into thinking that the end all and be all of politics are culture war issues. They never say anything about economics. They never say anything about class. And that's a reflection of the class that the artists tend to come from. Like their entire class at one time, when Catherine Liu writes about this very well in Virtue Hoarders, when the New Deal was more the ethos of the PMCs, even people coming out of that class thought and spoke in those terms, and artists tend to come out of that class. So they would do plays like Waiting for Lefty and Death of a Salesman that were about things like that. Now, the PMC class has been completely brainwashed with the idea that cultural signaling is politics, that there is no politics beyond that. Like class consciousness, it's it's completely gone. It's completely gone from the conversation. A few vague, yeah, we should have healthcare, but it's a long process and da 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 and incrementalism and all of that bullshit. But they really have, not only don't they have a class critique, they hate workers. They've been trained to see workers as MAGA, as these it's the old white trash thing. I mean, it's really that. It's that very elite white trash.
And now garbage.
It's the deplorables, it's garbage. And insofar as they care about non-white working class people, it's through a very patronizing lens of victimhood and defining them purely by their identity group without any class connotations, without ever defining them as part of a working class. They only want to deal with those subjects through a racial lens, which is a much safer way to approach it, to not see it as a class, because then Well, the only problem with the system is we need to diversify the ruling class, right? That's the only problem. And these poor white people,
Not and
they're just beyond the pale.
diversify the ruling class, in these performative gestures, but not actually improve the lives of working class and poor
Well, that's it.
Black people. Right. Exactly. That's the game that they are playing, and that's what they've used with Kamala Harris also. Just its identity. Oh, she's Indian and she's Black and she's everything you want to be. And you talk about this in your Substack piece as well, about how she's basically like a cardboard cutout, and the ruling class can do anything with her. And actually, that is precisely what makes her so suitable for their purposes.
She's what they've always wanted. She is the final product of identity politics. She's what it has always been about. It has always been about producing empty identitarian representation and pretending that represents meaningful progress in order to keep people from questioning the underlying economic system. Kamala is the perfect. She is what they've been working towards since Kennedy. That's another element, I think, of Kamala, because within the Constitution they limited the powers of the presidency very severely because they didn't want it to devolve into monarchy. But in this one area, because you have military emergencies, the military, they gave the president more power than in most other areas, than in domestic policy. And that's always been a problem when you get a guy like Kennedy who decides to express some kind of independence on that subject, because our system of government allows them to actually have an impact. You can't just kill it in committee when they decide to make a decision in terms of the military. We saw what happened with Kennedy, and ever since, I think they've wanted something like Kamala, where you have a president who is a president in name only. They can trot them out for speeches. They can trot them out to sell whatever they're trying to sell. And this is what I mean by it's the end result and the end goal of identity politics. When people attack her, rightly, on her military policies, whatever they tell her to sell to the public, they're going to call you a sexist. They're going to call you a racist. They're going to say, if a man had decided to do this, nobody would be saying anything. And then people say, no, it's that I think it's a terrible military policy. And while we're all fighting each other, they have a free hand to run the world. That is the purpose of Kamala Harris. She is the end product of decades of social engineering.
Thank you so much, Russell, for sharing that. And I was telling Keaton earlier, but I know you have to rush now for your own live stream, but sometime after the election, we would love to have you both over for like a fuller episode and discussion. But thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you. Enjoy the end of the world as we know it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
So in terms of the state of the world, it's still early and we still don't have any swing states called in the elections. By the numbers, Trump seems to have a small lead at the moment with 137 electoral votes versus 99 for Harris. This isn't surprising, though. Both Harris and Trump are winning the expected states so far. I mean, that's what's been happening since we saw the early results. What is somewhat surprising is that the race in Ohio was tighter than expected, though it was still called for Trump. And you want to go over more of the Ohio and the other results, Emily?
Yeah, just thinking about the signs that I saw today about how a number of precincts in Ohio claimed that Jill Stein had dropped out of the race and
outrageous.
wouldn't accept any votes for her. No Republican has ever been elected to the presidency without winning Ohio, and with J.D. Vance, Ohio senator, being the other half of the ticket, this should really have been even more in the bag. But Trump is only at 52.7%, with Harris at 46.5%, and that's with half of the votes counted. And I think we usually see that it swings towards the Democrats on the farther end, though I think with the question of early voting, that's all a bit up in the air. There are several key states we need to watch right now where results could be indicative of where this is all headed. In addition to Georgia, which we talked about earlier, these include North Carolina and, of course, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is the most important swing state of all with 19 electoral votes. So far, Harris is leading with only 15% of the ballots counted. It has been said by a number of election forecasters that whichever candidate wins Pennsylvania is likely to win the election. So definitely we'll be circling back to talk about Pennsylvania. And we'll be back with more results soon, and when we'll have a better sense of where things stand in the swing states. Because, of course, with the undemocratic electoral college, this all comes down
It
to
all
the
comes
swing
down to swing
states.
states, right? Exactly. And we'll know more hopefully in a little bit. But for more on the analysis of the election and also some other questions, we have Nick Cruz here in the waiting room from the Revolutionary Blackout Network. If we can add him here. It's just a bit slow, so thanks for your patience. Hi, Nick, can you hear us?
Hey, how you guys doing? Can you hear me now? How you guys doing?
Yes. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Nick. I had a question for you about how the election has gone so far. But first, we wanted to ask you, what do you think about the results so far? I mean, I know not much has been said. It's swing states are still not out with their results. But what do you think about where things are right now?
Like you said earlier, we don't have a lot of information right now. It does feel good because you see on Twitter and social media, you see a ton of people who are proud of their anti-genocide vote. And I'm seeing on Twitter now, I saw someone post some early tallies in Dearborn showing that there is a great turnout for Jill Stein and the Green Party. So it's good to see. We don't know the number right now, but it's good to see people who didn't allow the ruling class to convince themselves to throw their morality away. That there are people that are still willing to vote for a party that is against war, that they refuse to allow to accept the devil's bargain, voting for the genocidal Democrat Party. And I don't know who's going to win, and it's not necessarily revolutionary, but it would be very disastrous if Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party was allowed to win when they essentially have a mandate to commit genocide. Now, I know you guys probably hear these ridiculous arguments from progressives like Bernie Sanders and AOC, where they say stuff like, yeah, we don't 100% agree with Joe Biden on Gaza, which, yeah, the disagreement is genocide. But they said, well, we have to vote for them because we want to organize under them. And as they say that, you have Kamala Harris's AIPAC handler husband, Doug Emhoff, who is reassuring Jewish donors that Kamala Harris will be a diehard supporter of Israel and they will pass quote unquote anti-Semitism bills, which Chuck Schumer already promised and Doug Emhoff will champion, which will make criticism of the Zionist regime and the foreign policy of Israel illegal, which will have economic ramifications on college students, people who will otherwise be able to sue their employers for wrongful termination, like a few people already have. So the consequences of a potential Democrat win and the left in the United States supporting genocide would be absolutely dire from my perspective. So it's good to see that at least a coalition of people in our community did not fall for it and retained their souls and voted for their conscience.
Right. And I know Emily has a question for you in a little bit about voter suppression, and it's related to all of this. But before that, I was wondering if I could get you to respond to this video from Barack Obama. I'm sure you've seen this. You probably covered it on your show as well. Can we play that?
My understanding, based on reports I'm getting from campaigns and communities is that we have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. Now, I also want to say that that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. So if you don't mind, just for a second, I'm going to speak to y'all directly. The women in our lives have been getting our backs this entire time. They've been raising us and working and having our backs. And when we get in trouble, when the system's not working for us, they're the ones who are out there marching and protesting. And so now you're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down. That's not acceptable. That's not, this shouldn't even be a question.
Nick, what do you think about him, Barack Obama, with his grand speech berating Black working class men, and on top of that, equating Kamala Harris and other people, elite women like her, to working class women who apparently are raising, apparently she's like the working class women who are going to work every day, holding down 2 jobs and raising families.
The audacity of Barack Obama, who was the president who tanked Black wealth. He was the president who appointed Eric Holder as Attorney General, who was the point man for Wall Street, who was hired, and it was revealed that Barack Obama's cabinet was chosen by Wall Street, and Eric Holder was one of the people they chose for him because his job was to give immunity to Wall Street banks and CEOs who committed financial fraud against Black families. And this is something that's been underreported. This is stuff that I talk about early on in my career as a citizen journalist. But one of the things they did was they committed massive fraud, including forging signatures of elderly Black people during the financial crisis. And that directly led to Black wealth tanking, the way Barack Obama handled the housing crisis. So this man who was president during the start of Black Lives Matter, because there was a reason why Black Lives Matter as an idea had to start under him because of the Ferguson protests. And this is the same guy that when hearing the complaints of Black America, as we was complaining about our decline in wealth and police brutality, his message to the Black community was to tell us to pull up our pants and stop listening to rap music and blaming pop culture for our problems instead of the institutions that he enabled. These are things that Barack Obama told us. He wagged his finger at the Black community over and over again. And that's why it's still very confusing when I see many people in the Black community still support him. So him going to spill where he essentially smears Black men as sexist. I'm a sexist because I didn't vote for Kamala Harris, even though I voted for the Jewish woman, by the way. But they want to smear Black men as sexist for not voting for Kamala Harris, even though if the polls I saw earlier today, I saw a few exit polls. I was monitoring the chatter on social media. Latino men are branking for Trump. So you have Latino men, you have Indian men who don't support Kamala, but Black men catch all the strays. Why is that? Because that's the inherent racism of the white liberal, which I explained runs as strong or as stronger than the average conservative. Because the average white liberal believes that we owe them something. They believe that all the rights that Black people and minority people benefit from in the United States come from liberal ideology. That so Black people inherently owe their support to the Democratic Party. So whenever you veer from that, they view you as the enemy. They view you as a secret Russian or a secret sexist. I've been called all the above, Kshama.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you kind of talked on Barack Obama's actual record. Barack Obama in 2008 was the first election that I was able to vote in. I was 18 that year, and there was just so much just hype, right? Like hope and change. And that was the last time I voted for a Democrat for president. Because I think for many people my age, our age, it was like you could just ask this question at protest of, what was the moment when Barack Obama sort of lost your confidence, like betrayed you? And for many people, it was the way he handled the subprime mortgage crisis, as you covered. I think something else that really stuck with me at that time was, he made so many promises about how he was going to put on his marching shoes. Like you had in your mind that he had like this really excellent pair of like New Balances or whatever, that he was going to go out and be part of the movement. And instead, when those movements were on the street during his administration, he chided them, as you said, and basically told them to sit down and shut up. I think something I've seen you cover a lot in your broadcast that I wanted to ask you a little bit about, that of course is something that has impacted the Black community for decades, is voter suppression. We've seen how the Democrats, who claim to be sort of the paragons of and protectors of democracy, have specifically aimed voter suppression efforts against Jill Stein's campaign. And I wonder if you could just stop to talk about, how, first of all, you decided to back Jill Stein and why the Democrats are aiming so many of their attacks, like we saw in Nevada with them filing, 5 cases to get her off the ballot, and then today in Ohio, where they claim that she dropped out of the race, and why these attacks have been aimed at Stein's anti-war campaign.
So the liberal class tells us that the biggest obstacle in our life is the right wing courts, which is I'm not a big fan, obviously, of the right wing courts in our society. But isn't it interesting that the right wing courts are the ones who defend democracy from liberal attacks? Because it's the Democrat Party that has been assessed with suing Jill Stein and forcing her off the ballot. These are the same people who have 1,000 false criticisms of how democracy is ran in Venezuela, it's ran in Russia. But in Nicolas Maduro's election, there were 6 candidates on the ballot as American liberals criticized the democracies of other countries. Other countries have way more choices. But the idea of people voting against their interests, the liberal class's interests, it enrages them because, as I was talking about how people was posting pictures of their ballots, the response from the liberal class, like responding to these people, like there will be people who have family who died in Gaza, and then liberals will respond to them like in their post fantasizing about them being murdered under a potential Donald Trump presidency. So they have a rabid hatred for democracy as a whole. They have a rabid hatred of anyone who disagrees with their worldview, which is why you see the increased push for censorship among the liberal class, not only for their choices on democracy, but their opinions as a whole. They want to lock people up for being supportive of Russia. Like, even if you disagree or you got criticism of Russia, how is that something that should be illegal? Look at what they have done to Chairman Amali. Look at what, as I mentioned earlier before, Doug Emhoff and Chuck Schumer is doing, teaming up with AIPAC lobby. So people must understand it's a deep-seated hatred of democracy. You also asked me about my vote for Dr. Jill Stein, who I voted for in 2016 as well. So this is my 3rd election in a row voting for the Green Party. The only one I regret was being in 2020. We've seen the European Green Party calling for Dr. Jill Stein to drop out. And I think there's a conversation that's uncomfortable, but it has to be had on the left. The coordinated effort to infiltrate peace movements and shift them to the right and And I'm sorry if it hurts people's feelings, but that's exactly what Howie Hawkins was. And when you see the European Green parties calling for Jill Stein to drop out, that's because the Green parties all over Europe was infiltrated by a NATO imperialist machine. They're pro NATO, they're pro genocide. And I believe there was an effort to turn the Green Party in the United States into a liberal party. And this is the era of Howie Hawkins, where they lost a lot of credibility. So there's a few choices I had in facing this scenario as someone who voted Green before, someone who believes in building a future under a socialist ideology. Is, do I allow the Green Party to be captured by the liberal class, by the what I saw was obviously happening, the Howie Hawkins wing, or do I try to influence it, or do we try to push our politics? And when I look at their policy platform, and I am a policy based voter, I see hard push against sanctions, which is, believe, one of the greatest geopolitical destabilizers in the world right now. Their opposition to Zionism, the fact that they want to cut the military budget 70%, their support for reparations. So there's so many policies on the platform that I agree with, that I was trying to influence and flex the Green Party the best I can. That's why I believe in this time, with the rise of the genocidal psychosis of the West, that our number one priority as anti-imperialists is to form a coalition against the Zionist regime. Now, I have received criticisms from people to my left, other communists and other people, for supporting the Green Party, but I believe that just looking at the current situation, looking at the empire that we're up against, the best bet that I can do as a Marxist and what we can do as revolutionaries is to build a coalition against that. So one last thing I want to say regarding my support for the Green Party and Joe Stein is, if in this moment where you have both parties who are unapologetically supporting genocide, and we have two of the most unpopular candidates that we probably ever seen since Trump and Hillary Clinton, if the Green Party doesn't hit 5%, there has to be major changes. I'm one of the people that has a um, losing is not an option mentality. I love Jill Stein as a person. Like, I think she's great. I met her a few times, but it just like this is a serious thing that we are fighting for, for potential revolution, the betterment of the working class. So if anything other than 5%, considering the conditions that we're in, where I'm seeing libertarians, Shama, I see people who are libertarian minded, people who otherwise never voted for the Green Party, who came out and supported Joe Stein just because of how crazy and genocidal the duopoly has been. So it'll be no like anything personal against current Green Party membership, but if we don't hit 5% under these circumstances, there has to be some major changes. So that's my position. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that was really useful to hear, Nick. And in fact, I think once this election is over and it's now, we're there, we would love to have you back on strike to discuss this, this strategy. And I really agree with you in terms of what kind of party we need. We need a party that can actually go on the offensive. And that's why Worker Strike Back, as you know, we're not saying that the Green Party is a new party. We thought it was completely correct for us to, and necessary and important for us to build unity on a principle basis around the Jill Stein campaign, because she was the strongest anti-war, pro-worker campaign, and and you explained it in similar terms for yourself as well. And that we have to take whatever vote we can win this year for the Jill Stein campaign in order to begin to take the next steps for what we actually need urgently, which is a powerful and new party for working people, a party that is anti-war, but a party that is ultimately a party whose strength resides in its membership and in its accountability to the working class itself. And as you know, we're going to be discussing many of these things at the February organizing conference, which I assume you're going to be there at. We really need you there. So we'll see you there, and we'll hopefully, talk more about all this at that time.
Yeah, and we definitely have big plans because we discuss in RBN and among our organizing community that this election is just the beginning for like our being. We're only 3 years old, and we still have big plans for the future of organizing. So now that we have this anti-genocide coalition, we can't allow that momentum to die. So I definitely will be there in February. My vision and something that I want to see that didn't necessarily happen under the Jill Stein campaign, which I don't necessarily blame anyone for this, but I want to see the return of large Bernie Sanders style rallies. And I believe that
Yes.
especially if Kamala wins and there's a continued genocide, you guys think there won't be people power behind us? You think there won't be people furious about an ongoing genocide and the continued decline into neoliberalism? So I think going to next year in the next few years, however long it takes, this is something that we have to build up. Us having the ability to build big Bernie Sanders style rallies without the support of a DNC mailing list. So it will be a lot of work, but that's something that we had to work on together. So thank you guys for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Nick. And yes, we have all that work to do. Take care, and we'll see you soon, and definitely in February in Seattle.
Yeah, for sure. I see you guys. Have a good one.
You too.
So those who are angry at Workers' Strike Back, the anti-war movement, and Arab American voters for supporting Jill Stein are trying to tell us that we are all voting for Trump. In reality, it's the Democrats who've created the space for Trump again and again. He left office the most unpopular president in US history and only has a chance of returning because of the spectacular and shameless betrayals of the Democratic Party, of their attacks on working people, abandonment of Medicare for all, the $15 an hour minimum wage, canceling student debt, on and on and on. Working people are hurting, and that is why people are voting against Kamala Harris. And if they lose swing states like Michigan due to Harris and the Democrats arming and funding a genocide, then they will have absolutely no one to blame but themselves. This will entirely be at the Democrats' doorstep. They destroyed their credibility with Arab Americans and anti-war voters and millions of other working people. Workers' Strike Back members have talked to a lot of voters who are absolutely horrified by what Harris has done and were planning to vote for Trump. Those we reached, we tried to convince to vote for Stein, but millions will never hear the case for Stein, who is only mentioned in the corporate media when they attack her. If Trump is elected, we already know that the Democrats won't protect working people or oppressed groups any more than they did the last time around. The Democrats will discourage mass movements, not build them.
And who will actually fight against Trump if he is elected? As I said in Seattle at our rally 2 weeks ago with Jill Stein and with Abandon Harris, we, working people, socialists, or organizers on the left, we will be the ones fighting Trump, just like we did the last time. In 2016, after Trump was elected, working people, our city council office, and our fellow socialists, we organized protests here in Seattle when the Democrats were sitting shell-shocked. Those of you who were there remember how they were completely paralyzed and they had no idea what to do, and they certainly had no intention of calling for protests or at least taking the initiative on it. We were the ones who organized protests, socialists around the country the following day, and tens of thousands of people came out. We socialists were the ones who, under the threat of Trump's Muslim ban, shut down an international airport, SeaTac Airport here near Seattle, with mass civil disobedience. We organized that. This was the only US airport fully shut down. And at that action, the Democrats played no role other than Pramila Jayapal, Congress member Pramila Jayapal, and the chair of the Democratic Congressional Democratic Caucus, Progressive Caucus. She did a photo op there, and then she left. In fact, the Democrats were so unhappy about our movement, civil disobedience, on that night that at the same time that they wanted the photo ops with the movement, they also were making repeated phone calls to me saying, let's close it down, let's shut down the protest, as we were protesting. When the Supreme Court was preparing to overturn Roe v. Wade and the Democrats had rolled over once again, we, socialists and working people and union members, built protests, and our movement won the first abortion rights sanctuary in the country in Seattle. Emily talked about that. which made it illegal for Seattle police to arrest anyone who came to Seattle accused of violating an abortion law in another state. And as she said, we also won full funding for abortion rights. What were the Democrats doing after Trump's first election? Barack Obama said, give Trump a chance. The Democrats prioritized the stability of their capitalist system over any building of working class resistance to Trump. Their challenge was exclusively through the courts. Why? Because they are, in fact, more afraid of working class movements, more afraid of working people as a whole than they are of Trump. And this Trump, who they claim represents immediate fascism, according to their claims, in reality, what they fear is not Donald Trump, but their system being upset by millions of people out on the streets. That is not what they want. The far greater evil than Trump for working people is this two-party system. I mean, Trump is no friend to the working class. He's a deeply reactionary person. But at the end of the day, the best way and the only way to fight Trumpism and to fight the Democrats is to fight this two-party system itself. These two capitalist parties that are on a fast track towards wider and global war, increasingly brutal attacks on working people, and a climate apocalypse. We have to stop that. To do that, we have to end our support for the two-party system, and we have to fight actively in each election against both these bankrupt parties, because they don't care what we think. They only care when we organize our collective power, including with strike action, and fight back and deny them our votes and carry on bigger fight back. I should let everybody know who's watching this that I personally need to leave because I'm going to be joining the Jill Stein campaign on their live stream. And then after that, I'll be joining Abandon Harris on their live stream. It's really exciting for us that we have been able to work together on a principal basis. So I'm looking forward to speaking there. But if you're watching this, don't go anywhere. We're not done yet. We still have more results to represent. And also, Emily will be here, and Emily will be conducting an interview with Summer Miller, another of our Worker Strike Back members, who has been in Michigan for weeks, and she has a lot to share about how things have been going there and what she's been hearing from Arab and Muslim people. I also wanted to echo what Emily said earlier, that people should register for the February conference. Go to Worker Strike Back website and register for that. Also attend our meetings in November. Emily mentioned that we have meetings in various cities, in-person meetings like in Chicago, Seattle, Kansas City, and Boston. But we also have a national Zoom meeting. So it really doesn't matter where you are. You should at least attend the Zoom, because clearly the next steps are so crucial. And in addition to that, if you haven't subscribed to On Strike, please do so. And we need your donations. Throughout this live stream, you have seen what a dynamic approach we have. We're not journalists, we are activists, we are fighters, we are organizers. And the reason we have launched this On Strike broadcast is because we want On Strike to be a vehicle for building movements of working people, a vehicle to build the anti-war movement. And for that to be possible, we need your financial support. So please donate to Worker Strike Back. And it's really crucial that you join Worker Strike Back. Emily will, if you joined us later, she'll talk about the special offer that we have right now only during the live stream. But stay tuned and we're going for a break for a very short while. After the break, we're going to be back. So don't go anywhere. Maybe go get some water. If you're feeling sleepy, go get some coffee. But stay right with us because Summer is going to join us and we have more exciting stuff happening in this live stream. But thank you all and solidarity.
Thank you so much, Kshama.
Joining me to discuss the election and our call to walk away from the Democrats and Harris, even if it means the election of Trump, is Kshama Sawant. Let's begin with what you said. I'm going to be completely upfront. I'm in total agreement with you. Let's begin with what you said and why you said it.
As you said, we said in our meeting rally in Michigan, in Dearborn, that was a rally jointly organized by Worker Strike Back alongside with Abandon Harris and the Jill Stein campaign. And our starting point was, and you alluded to this, Chris, is no votes for genocide. that if genocide is not a red line, then there is no red line. And that is why we need to turn out every possible vote for Jill Stein, who is the strongest left anti-war pro-worker candidate, and especially where they matter the most, which is in swing states like Michigan, which could actually decide the outcome of the election. And in fact, we are joined by the activists at Abandon Harris, who have also said that this needs to, the Democrats' role in the genocide has to mean that they have to pay a price for what they have done and what they continue to do. And for us, we don't believe that the Democratic Party by itself is going to reform itself simply because of a message that is sent by the Muslim voters and by the anti-war movement. If that indeed happens, and I think we should be clear, it's not a straightforward thing. In fact, we have to work really hard to turn out the vote for Jill Stein in states like Michigan, and worker strike back activists are right now on the ground to do that. But the purpose of doing this, first of all, is, as we said, it's a moral and political question. If genocide is not a red line, then there is no red line. And beyond that, it is to illustrate that at the end of the day, neither Kamala Harris nor Donald Trump, neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party has any interest whatsoever in stopping the genocide, let alone stopping wars in a general sense. They have no interest in fulfilling the needs of hundreds of millions of American working people. And so for us, for the anti-war movement, for the American working class, for us, the only way forward is independent of the Democratic and Republican parties. And we see this meaning the fight to defeat Harris in Michigan, and potentially for it to defeat Harris in the election as a whole, for us to win every possible vote for Jill Stein. All of this is a stepping stone to build a powerful anti-war movement that is independent of the big business warmongering parties of US capitalism, and also pointing towards the dire, urgent need for a new anti-war party for the working class.
We should be clear, and this was, of course, the fallacy of Bernie Sanders' campaign. You're not going to build a movement like this in an election cycle.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, that has been one of the abiding flaws of the approach that has been used by many left candidates over and over again. Obviously, Bernie Sanders is topmost among them. And in fact, it's important to examine how far Bernie Sanders has gone, not to mention AOC and the squad. I don't necessarily put them in the same category as Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders is a very useful education of what not to do, where even despite good intentions, and I don't doubt his good intentions, despite that, if your political analysis tells you that the best we can do, the best that working people and anti-war activists can do is to get behind Biden, and then after that get behind Harris, then that is a dead end. And at that point, good intentions don't matter. If you are leading the working class and movements, both working class movements and the anti-war movement, down this dead end of supporting the very party that is that represents the interests of the same billionaire class that is completely antagonistic to the interests of working people, and the same billionaire class that has an interest in this genocide. And they're not innocent bystanders, they are driving this process. They're also not just tolerating Netanyahu's extreme practices, but really not wanting it. No, I mean, that is all political theater. That is the purpose of that, is to create a grand illusion that somehow the Biden-Harris administration is reluctantly supporting the Israeli state. That is absolutely not the case. In fact, the whole history of American capitalism and capitalism as a whole shows it, proves it to be a consistently bloody and bloodthirsty system, in which the blood that flows is, that of course not of the billionaire class, it's of working people and poor people. And And if we tie ourselves to the political representatives of this system, then we are going to go down the same dead end that Bernie Sanders has gone. And I think we also need to mention the role of the labor leaders. After the Dearborn rally, we also did a rally in Seattle alongside the Jill Stein campaign and Abandon Harris. This was on Tuesday, October 15th. And at that rally, when I spoke, I said that actually the labor leaders who are cheerleading Kamala Harris after having cheerled Joe Biden, they will have a lot to answer for in history. That history is going to take note of the fact that while 350,000 Palestinian people, babies, children, elderly, women, were being massacred indiscriminately at that moment, and with the Democrats and with Kamala Harris herself with blood on her hands, at that moment, for labor leaders, progressive labor leaders like Sean Fain, to be cheerleading Harris, this will be taken note of, and future generations are going to ask, at that moment when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were being slaughtered, what was your position at that time? You cheerled the very purveyors of that genocide. And in my speech, I urged Sean Fain and other labor leaders to take back that position and rescind their endorsement of Kamala Harris. Not that I expect them to do that, but the point is that we have to call them out for their shameful role. If you look at the coups that have been carried out by US capitalism in country after country, whether it is Latin America or Asia or Africa, if you talk about the wars that have been instigated from US capitalism worldwide, if you look at the attacks on working people as a whole, it's both Democrats and Republicans equally, in equal measure, responsible for all of this. And then setting aside all of that, if you want to look at how Trumpism and right-wing populism has grown in the first place in recent years, in the last 20, 30 years, even there you can see that, first of all, for example, the Tea Party movement, the right-wing Tea Party movement, that really gained ascendancy in the wake of Barack Obama, another celebrated Democratic president, having broken his promises on many fronts, including on Medicare for all and the public option. And his most importantly, the fact that this was during the Great Recession, he bailed out the very big banks and Wall Street that were entities that were responsible for the Great Recession. He bailed them out. He bailed out the billionaires and the multimillionaires, and working and poor people were faced with a devastating economic crisis, with millions of home foreclosures, people losing their jobs, becoming homeless, the public sector workers taking on mandatory furloughs and in some cases voluntary furloughs because they wanted to sacrifice. And what did they get in return for it? Ever lower living standards and more attacks on state and city public budgets. And of course, the other broken promise from Obama was that he famously promised no troop surge in Afghanistan, and one of the first things he did was a troop surge in Afghanistan. He became the deporter in chief, devastating policies towards working class and poor immigrants. And then you had Joe Biden breaking his promises on $15 an hour, on Medicare for all, on canceling student debt. And as I said, he was also the strike breaker in chief. And then you had now you have where Donald Trump left the office as the most unpopular president in modern US history, and now he has a real chance of winning back the White House. Why? Because of the betrayals by the Democrats. So in other words, not only are the Democrats and Republicans fairly aligned on most policy fronts, whether it is domestic or international, they together represent the interests of the capitalist class. In fact, beyond that, it's also true that the Democrats are the best builders of Trumpism itself. So it is backwards and circular logic for us to be told that we have to vote for Kamala Harris in order to prevent Trump from getting into office. Well, Trump has a chance to get into office again precisely because of the betrayals by the Harris and Biden administration.
Hi, thanks so much for giving us that quick break so we could have a snack. But we are back, and we're really excited to announce that at 10:30 Eastern, we're actually going to have Dr. Hassan, one of the founders of Abandon Harris, who's on the ground in Michigan, on for a brief interview. So please stay tuned to catch that. But right now, we actually also have another worker strike back member, Summer Miller, who has been spending the last several weeks in Michigan in the Dearborn area, canvassing in Arab and Muslim communities, especially in the decisive state of Michigan. And yeah, we're excited to have her. So let's go ahead and add Summer.
Okay.
Hi, Summer.
Hi. Are we back on?
So yeah, thanks. So yes, we are on.
Great.
Okay, so Summer, you traveled from Seattle to Michigan to volunteer with Worker Strike Back's Get Out the Vote effort for Jill Stein. What motivated you to make such a big commitment to do this work in general and in Michigan specifically?
Yeah, well, things are fucking hard for working people. I'm a preschool teacher paying $2,100 a month in rent. Under the Democrats, prices have gone up. Inflation is at record levels. Joe Biden calls himself, and Democrats have called him, the most pro-union president in history. Yet Democrats broke their promise of the $15 per hour minimum wage. They broke the railroad workers strike, and the cost of living crisis is out of control. And now, over the past year, they've been funding a genocide. So I joined Worker Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers because I wanted to fight back, and I understood that both the Democrats and the Republicans represent the interests of capitalism, and they're the ones that have made my life and other working people's lives hell. And Harris and the Democratic Party have the blood of over 350,000 Palestinians on their hands, as do the Republican Party. I also understand that it's the Democrats' attacks, betrayals, and broken promises that have paved the way for Trump and for the right wing. And unless we build a working class anti-war alternative, things will continue to get worse for working people, whether it's Harris or Trump elected. And that's why Jill Stein and being in Michigan right now is so important, with this state being home to a large Arab and Muslim American community who are angry and looking for a way to end the genocide. That's why I came out here.
Yeah, I definitely get that. My rent is also too damn high. While in Michigan, you also campaigned to get out the vote on college campuses, including the University of Michigan, Dearborn. What have you been hearing from students and young people in Michigan?
Yeah, we've met a lot of people who are on the fence. Many of them are not on the fence between Kamala Harris and anybody else. They're actually on the fence about Jill Stein or Donald Trump, or Jill Stein or not voting. A huge number of Muslim and Arab Americans are very clear on the need to reject Kamala Harris for funding the genocide. I spoke to a man outside a grocery store in Hamtramck a few days ago about how the betrayals of the Democrats led him to believe that Trump cared more about working people than the Democrats did. But he actually left after talking to us. He bought a pamphlet and a Worker Strike Back T-shirt and was, incredibly open to our ideas once he heard about an alternative. It just goes to show that Democrats are the biggest builders for the far right because they don't offer anything for working people. The thing that we've been talking to people about is, yes, we should defeat Kamala Harris in this election, but not on the basis of not voting, not on the basis of voting for Donald Trump and having any illusion that Trump stands for peace or for workers, but on the basis of voting for the strongest anti-war, pro-worker alternative, which is Jill Stein. People are fed up with Biden, Harris, the genocide, the betrayals, the broken promises. And when I mentioned the 15 Now movement and that working people won $15 per hour by, using Kshama Sawant's socialist city council office to build a movement to fight the Democrats on city council, people are excited to hear how we won it because it wasn't by running, in the Democratic Party. It wasn't by cutting backroom deals with the Democrats or big business. We won it by organizing thousands of people in the streets, packing City Hall, demanding it, and forcing the Democrats to vote yes on it. People want that kind of fighting strategy, but they also say that $15 isn't enough anymore, and they're right. So I mentioned that because of our victory and our fighting approach, the minimum wage in Seattle is about to be nearly $21 an hour, and how Worker Strike Back is now fighting for a $25 per hour minimum wage. And then their eyes light up. They're excited, and they want to fight for a bold demand. And lastly, I'll just say that like we talk to people who are feeling pressure to vote for Harris. I spoke to a woman who voted for Kamala Harris actually, but felt awful about it and completely regretted it. It was actually really sad to see because, you know, after she talked to us, she said that if she talked to us before, she would have voted for Jill Stein. And so this is exactly why it's so important that Workers Strike Back has been on the ground in Dearborn, in working class cities like Hamtramck and Detroit, talking to thousands of people. And in fact, this is why we need a new working class party that can put in the kind of resources that it takes to talk to millions of people around the country, to organize and to put forward a working class alternative.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I think you've covered such a broad swath of like the kind of people that we've been encountering. It's really helps paint a picture that, you know, we're not getting from the corporate media. I do want to sort of circle back to the mood on the campuses, though, because I do think we're seeing just like the biggest crackdown on campus protests that we've seen since 1968. And of course, the other connection to 1968 is that there was the Vietnam War happening there, that the students were playing a central role in protesting. You know, I think we're likely to see these crackdowns continue under a Harris or a Trump administration. But, you know, because you're specifically at the University of Michigan, I wanted to highlight there's a news piece that came out in the last few days that the University of Michigan administration has been shopping around for a prosecutor who will be more punishing to student protesters rather than bringing cases to local authorities who only brought criminal charges on 10% of arrested protesters. U of M went to the state attorney general, Dana Nessel, who has criminally prosecuted a whopping 85% of protesters, so just a huge leap. The state attorney general claims it's not illegal for her to step in on local cases, but the piece in The Guardian raised questions over the fact that 6 out of the 8 regents at U of M have donated to Nessel's political campaign, some of them over $16,000, so not like small, working class donations. What is the mood among students, and what strategy do you think is needed to organize against the crackdowns led by Democrats across the country?
Yeah, I mean, there's a mood among students to fight, but many of them, you know, saw the way that the protests earlier this year were suppressed, and they're looking for a way forward. But many don't know what that is, and this is why, you know, you see these regions and administrations at places like U of M trying to crack down, even though, you know, even further on these protests. It's because they don't want students to learn the lesson that they can fight and win. So their response is to crack down further and make it more difficult for students to protest and speak out. But this is why we need to talk about strategy for the anti-war movement, how to connect the student protests to the labor movement, and talk about both the strengths and the weaknesses of these protests that that should have happened earlier. That happened earlier in the year. The student protests should have strengthened themselves further by connecting to the labor movement. A great example is the UAW and union members at the University of California, who voted to go on strike in solidarity with the student protests. We should have had more strikes like that. And also these things need to be connected to building a new working class party, anti-war party that can actually defeat the Democrats and the Republicans and use the energy of these protests to organize beyond campuses and put demands not just on university administrations, but the Biden and Harris and the Democrats to end US military aid to Israel and end the genocide.
Yeah, I think that last point that you made is just especially important. Once the sort of strategy that the anti-war movement has necessarily focused on the elections for this last few months, but with the elections over, we're going to need to be talking about what is our next strategy? How do we escalate the movement? And I do think that the protests on student campuses, on college campuses, have been overly focused on this question of divestment and not sufficiently taken up the broader demand to end the war, which is something that would unite not just sort of students on campus in what could be kind of a somewhat confusing demand of divestment, but a very specific demand of ending the war and getting campus workers, the community around the campus involved, and use it to kind of build momentum. So yeah, I'm really glad that you drew that out. I wonder if you could, talk just, I know you've commented on this a bit already, but, you've talked about how Workers Strike Back members have not only like convinced Trump supporters to vote for Jill Stein and, kind of introduced Jill Stein to many people. But just, what else do you think has been really the impact of having worker strike back members like yourself on the ground in Michigan? And why should people get involved with worker strike back?
Yeah, well, there's a total vacuum of labor leadership, but also, organizations on the left have abdicated their political responsibilities. We've seen labor leaders like Sean Fain, make calls for a ceasefire, but then turn around and cheerlead Biden and Harris. You know, Calling for a ceasefire is meaningless if you endorse the person funding a genocide. Unfortunately, that's the case with the majority of the labor leadership. AOC and Bernie have also endorsed Harris and completely betrayed the people who got them elected. Rashida Tlaib, who represents Dearborn, has endorsed Harris in all but name, and that's a complete abdication of leadership. There's a laundry list of so-called left organizations that are staying quiet or endorsing a safe state strategy. Like, how do you call yourself a leftist and tell the more than 200,000 Arab and Muslim Americans in Michigan to vote for the person that's funding the genocide of their families? What distinguishes Worker Strike Back in a historic way is that we are one of the rare ones who have not only courageously supported the vote for Jill Stein, but actually fought the Democrats on the ground in Michigan. If you feel like you can't vote for Jill Stein because you're a swing state, that's not true. We're specifically campaigning in a crucial swing state. So your vote for Jill Stein is even more powerful in a swing state like Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. And we have to send a message that these parties do not own our votes. We won't vote for genocide, and we're getting organized to build a new working class anti-war party. Genocide is a red line for me, as it is for hundreds of Arab and Muslim Americans that I've spoken to here, and millions of other working class people across the country. Worker Strike Back worked alongside Abandon Harris, providing building the rallies in Dearborn and Seattle, and we have fought hard to build the vote for Jill Stein across the Detroit area. I've been volunteering here on the ground in Dearborn for 2 weeks, but I'm not the only Worker Strike Back member getting out the vote in Seattle, or getting out the vote. We have members getting out the vote in Seattle, Boston, Chicago, and Minneapolis, as well as people who've spent hours phone banking across the country and in Michigan. And it's vital that we build on this momentum of this historic anti-war vote and continue to get organized beyond the election. We hope people join us at the November meetings, inauguration protests, and our upcoming organizing convention on February 22nd in Seattle. Please become a member of Worker Strike Back right now. We need you to be part of this movement because it will take all of us to fight back against whoever wins this election. Every single member gets us one step closer to building, the working class anti-war party that we need to take on the Democrats and the Republicans. It strengthens the fight to end the genocide and end the occupation, and it gets us one step closer to ending capitalism, and transforming society, transforming this entire system.
Thank you so much, Summer. And yeah, I just really couldn't agree more. I think now is a really important moment for people to get active, to join Worker Strike Back. We actually have a special offer right now. If you sign up as a Worker Strike Back member for at least $10 a month in membership dues, we're going to send you a button and a How to End the War on Gaza pamphlet. This is a pamphlet that we have actually been selling on the ground in Dearborn outside of mosques and coffee shops and grocery stores. It's like a real strategy, tactical sort of book on how do we build a movement that's capable of ending this war. I think also if you sign up for $25 a month, we'll add to that the t-shirt that Summer is wearing right now, the Worker Strike Back t-shirt. I don't know if she can show you the really excellent piece on the back of "When we fight, we can win." But I think this is the kind of thing that we want to be wearing to the inauguration protest. Thank you so much, Summer. Thank you for dropping things in your life and heading out to Michigan, inspiring us all. Appreciate you joining us.
Of course. Thanks, Emily. See you later.
So we've got as I mentioned when we came back from the break, we've got Abandon Harris co-founder Hassan Abdel Salam is going to be joining us for an interview live from Michigan at 10:30. But I want to get into a little bit more of an update on some of the results that we've seen rolling in from across the country, which is just going to continue. Of course, polls are still open here on the West Coast, but we are seeing as poll workers are tabulating and counting things across the country, important updates. So I think sort of flowing out of the point that Summer and I were just discussing, we're seeing that in some majority Arab precincts outside of Detroit, Jill Stein has gotten hundreds of votes, while Harris has only gotten double digits. And this shows exactly what Worker Strike Back has been speaking to, and what we've been on the ground trying to make happen, that there's a rejection of Harris by Muslim voters en masse, and that there's a real hunger for an alternative, for sort of the genocider in chief that's running for re-election. This is, I think, the crucial question, and it really shows the openness for Jill Stein's anti-war campaign. As far as swing states go, only Ohio has been called so far. This is a narrow race overall, but Ohio has been called for Trump. And because of the undemocratic Electoral College, this election will come down to a few key states. Pennsylvania will likely be very close and the decisive state, and we may not know the results there for several days because of a archaic rule where they can't even begin opening or processing ballots until election day. So we should expect some delays there, and of course, just like the all-out focus that both candidates have put on that state. Currently, Trump is leading in states that have been called by the Electoral College with 188 electoral votes versus Harris's 99. Harris may narrowly squeak by in this election, but we are facing the very real potential for a second Trump presidency, with some outlets saying that the election is leaning to Trump. But, I think it's still entirely too close to call. No matter who wins by the end of the week, we need to continue our fight against the genocidal war on Gaza, the fight to protect LGBTQ people and abortion rights, and continue to fight to build the basis for the new political party that working people need. I agree with what our guest Nick Cruz had to say in terms of we should take these results from the Jill Stein campaign as a snapshot of what's possible, but also of what our task is for the next several years, of how urgently we need to build a working class party that is ready to go on the offensive against the two parties of the billionaires, against the two ruling class parties, against the bosses, and that links the movements in the streets and the movements on the campuses and the movements in our workplaces together with a fighting party, rather than tying our hands behind our backs by having our unions and our community organizations like Sunrise that was mentioned and other discussions continuing to endorse a party that doesn't support us. Sorry, we're just trying to juggle it by myself for a little while in here. But I have that we have a couple of kind of key things that I do want to get across before we get to this exciting interview with the Abandon Harris founder, who's been, I think, actually at a Green Party event in Dearborn, and I think sort of highlighting the joint work going on between all these organizations, where Worker Strike Back, Abandon Harris, and the Green Party were together tonight on election night to watch these results roll in after tirelessly volunteering over the last several weeks all together. So yeah, Worker Strike Back has been playing a fighting role in this election season, really uniting these different forces coming out of the DNC and calling for these joint rallies with Jill Stein and Abandon Harris. And that has been not just, as many other left organizations have, rehashing the same tired points about how Trump is a bad guy, which, I mean, obviously he is, but we've gone further. We've been crystal clear about how the Democrats are not a quote-unquote lesser evil. They betray working people and drive the growth of the far right. We have fought tooth and nail to turn out every vote against the genocide and for pro-worker, anti-war presidential candidate Jill Stein. We've actively sent our members to the front lines in the key swing state of Michigan, fanning out to talk to thousands of voters furious at the pro-war presidential candidate Kamala Harris and Donald Trump about the anti-genocidal alternative Jill Stein. You've seen on our segments over the last few weeks, our members out in front of grocery stores, masjids, in fact, inside of masjids some over the last few weeks. But all of us know that ending the genocide, continuing the fight for major changes that working people need, like a $25 an hour minimum wage and Medicare for all, will mean organizing beyond Election Day. It's not just going to be turning out to vote. That's a huge task that we wanted to encourage people to take that step. But there are many steps beyond that, right? All the forces that have come together to end the genocide and build the vote for Jill Stein should come to the Saturday, February 22nd organizing conference Worker Strike Back is building. This event is an opportunity to fight the two parties of genocide, build a working class anti-war movement, and discuss next steps for building a new party. This is a real opportunity, to meet some of the speakers from the events, to see, to connect with activists from across the country. This conference will last from 10 a.m. To 5 p.m. Pacific time. We highly encourage you to come in person to Seattle if that's possible. Because we want to really see the strength of the anti-war pro-worker movement that wants to build a new party in person. So make your travel arrangements as soon as possible if you're able. But also we do want to organize a hybrid event, including watch parties where possible for our Worker Strike Back chapters, hosting them across the country. So keep a lookout on our website. On the event page to register, both to come in person or to attend remotely. That same weekend on Sunday, we'll host an inaugural Worker Strike Back convention. Worker Strike Back is building a national organization with chapters from coast to coast. One with regular monthly meetings to discuss urgent political questions and what we can do to play an active role in changing things. These monthly meetings are, again, a place for us to learn about history, to talk politically about what it is that is necessary strategically and tactically to build, whether it's a strike in your workplace or to build the anti-war movement, looking at lessons of history, talking to other organizers who've had breakthroughs and victories in their workplaces or with major struggles. So we post our monthly chapter meetings on the events page of our website, workerstrikeback.org/events. As socialist and former independent city council member Kshama Sawant said at the launch of Worker Strike Back, quote, "We are an independent movement organizing in the streets and in our workplaces against the billionaires and their political servants." You've heard from many workers this evening about why they joined. Jessica spoke about how she joined just a few months ago. You've heard from members from across the country, either about why they've joined or what they've done as members, including, writing political analysis and planning for the month ahead, including the important events for, planning for the inauguration protests that we are already starting to lay the groundwork for. So join Worker Strike Back, be part of the democratic decision-making of a growing combat organization, and register for our convention. Find both of these events on our website. Coming up next, we have as I said, an interview with Dr. Hassan, the founder of Abandon Harris. And please don't leave before we get him on at 7:30. So just a couple of minutes. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back.
We in Worker Strike Back, we believe that the best way to build this movement and using this campaign is to be truthful and sober about facts with working people. When we organize, we take the question of organizing working people very seriously in Worker Strike Back. And we believe that it doesn't help us to build the morale of working people, of the anti-war movement, of the Muslim community that wants to fight to end this genocide and is angry at the Democrats and Republicans, to tell them that maybe Jill Stein can win. We don't agree that that is useful, because if you look at what's going to happen, what's likely going to happen after election night, and maybe the results won't be settled on election night, but the point is that on inauguration day in January, it is going to be either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the White House. I think we have to be crystal clear about that and explain the need to fight for every possible vote for Jill Stein from the context of how it can play a key role in building an anti-war movement that is independent of the Democrats and Republicans, that emboldens working people, builds up the morale of the Muslim community by sending a powerful message to Harris and the Democratic Party. And I strongly believe, and my fellow activists in Workers' Strike Back strongly believe, that working people are fully capable of understanding this and being energized to fight back. They understand, they understand that Jill Stein is not going to win. So the Jill Stein campaign saying that 10 times that they're going to win is not going to convince people that they're going to win. Instead, unfortunately, it could be counterproductive potentially, because when the results show that that Jill Stein campaign is nowhere near winning, I mean, we've seen the trajectories. It's going to be, as we said, if our campaign gets 1%, that should be celebrated. But how that same 1% or 1.2% or whatever it is gets perceived by working people very much depends on how the strategy has been laid out. If we were to go around saying Jill Stein could win or Jill Stein could get 20%, whatever, and then she gets 1% or 1.2%, then instead of seeing that million or million and a half votes as a tremendous confirmation that working people are rejecting, a whole section of working people are rejecting the Democrats and Republicans and are ready to fight, instead of seeing it as a message of being a building block, instead it will be seen as demoralizing. It could be, I'm not saying it will, but it could be seen as demoralizing, that, oh, well, we were told we could win. We were told we could win 5, 10%, 20%. And instead it's such a small result. Nothing works. Third parties don't work. I'm just going to get a check out of politics. So those risks are very are quite significant. And that is why we believe that it is important to be truthful and honest to the working class and make the case in a way that will actually energize working people. And we've had a lot of people tell us that they appreciate that we're being honest about it. And furthermore, we should also examine the further point that if instead of getting 1.5%, Jill Stein were to get 5%, that would be massive. I mean, I don't expect that it will be, but I would be happy to be proven wrong. I want the Jill Stein campaign. I want the anti-war vote to be as strong as possible. But my point is that if you warn people with a sober understanding of what's likely to happen, and then your results are better than that, then nobody's going to blame you for misleading them. I mean, it's just going to add to more of the energizing effect. And we're not speaking about this hypothetically. We use this approach in our election campaigns in Seattle. In 2012, I ran against the most powerful Democrat in the state house, Frank Chop. He was the Speaker of the House at that time. We did not expect to come anywhere close to winning. In the primary, we were running against another Democrat, actually, and we told people in our activism during the campaign and during the primary campaign that we are probably going to win about 1%, but it was still worth fighting for because this was the first example in 100 years of a socialist working class campaign. And we got tremendous support from working people. I mean, it was such a fiery, energetic campaign. We won 9% in the primary. It was a huge shot in the arm for people to think that, wow, we went from expecting 1% to 9%. Nobody walked home after primary election night feeling demoralized. People walked home thinking, I'm going to get up tomorrow and fight like hell in the general election. Even there, we said, we're not going to win, but let's fight like hell to win every vote. And then we got almost 30% of the vote, which was the highest vote at that time that any of Frank Chop's opponents had ever gotten. And we used that as the building block to then win the city council election, which we won the very next year. But even there, we did not run the campaign saying we're going to win. Instead, we said, look how uphill it is. Look how the Democrats fight viciously against us. We need every single one of you out here. So we use that as a rallying cry to and may help people understand that this is not about admiring me and voting for me and leaving it at that. It's about you getting involved, because we will need that movement on the streets and in our workplaces. The fact that the Harris campaign is responding is confirmation that this type of combative strategy from working people and the left, as we have put forward, which is defeat Harris in Michigan, fight to defeat Harris in Michigan, fight to extract every possible vote for Jill Stein in Michigan, that type of offensive strategy is the way to go. And you know, the best confirmation, as we've always seen throughout our work in Seattle, where we won the $15 minimum wage, the Amazon tax, and unprecedented renters' rights, despite the opposition of every Democrat in the city, and not to mention big business, we've seen that the best confirmation, the best compliments come from the ruling class themselves because of the way they respond. When they feel threatened, they start responding, they start attacking. Otherwise, if they're not attacking you, then you should know that you're irrelevant and you're doing something wrong. And so this is confirmation that this type of offensive strategy actually works. And it's also what working people want to get involved in. It is when we put forward this point that let's actually get organized to fight against the Democratic Party. That is what people want to hear, working people want to hear. And I should also mention that the way Workers Strike Back has been campaigning and our overall strategy is by no means, as I was alluding to earlier, limited to just this election. As you said, it's not about just surfacing every 4 years for an election. It is about using election campaigns themselves, win or lose, as a platform to build future struggle. And I do disagree with the Jill Stein campaign. They have put forward this idea that somehow Workers Strike Back and I are using this strategy because we don't want to talk about winning, or we're less excited about winning. I mean, that's nonsense. Obviously, I mean, if our record in Seattle is there for anyone to see, we won 4 elections despite the millions of dollars and the absolutely grotesque opposition by the Democratic Party, all their attacks, personalized and political, all kinds of attacks. Despite all of that, we won 4 elections. We won historic victories like the $15 wage. And we left office last year undefeated and launched Workers Strike Back, this nationwide organization. So unfortunately for the working class, the example that we have provided in Seattle over our decade is at this moment the only example, the only contemporary example of the kind of the fight back strategy, the fighting strategy to use elections as a vehicle to build social movements. And we're doing no different here.
You should just tick off, for people who don't know, some of the achievements you made in Seattle while you were on the city.
We in Workers Strike Back, we
Thanks so much for sticking with us. We are excited now to cut to the co-founder of Abandon Harris, Dr. Hassan Abdel Salam, a very exciting interview for us to get tonight, who we've been co-organizing with for the last several months. So let's go ahead and add him to the stream. We can welcome him.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Hassan.
the so-called, capitalist stability
Hey,
system which we like.
Emily,
Hi.
how's
How are
everything?
you,
Let me
Dr.
let me
Hassan?
let me go into the. We're at the Green Party watch party here in Dearborn, as you can see the background.
That's exciting.
Yes, yes, yes. How are you?
I'm doing really well. How have the last few weeks been for you? Busy, I'm sure.
Oh, it's been not only exhausting, it's actually the feelings and emotions so complex, as I've constantly been struggling with our campaign and the different swing states that we've been working in. Very, very, very unpredictable, and trying to just get all the resources and the critical spots that we were interested in having in Arizona and Georgia, in Michigan, in Wisconsin. And so we're like super excited. We've achieved a lot. We've learned a lot. We've detected a lot of problems that we need also to resolve. But it's a great beginning for us in terms of political mobilization as we move forward together. And I know that Kshama and I spoke about February. So looking forward to working with Workers Strike Back into the next few months.
Yeah, we're really excited to keep organizing with you all as well. I think, we all know that our work is not done, even though exhausted we may be. I'm wondering, you spoke to it being pretty unpredictable for the key swing states. Could you talk a little bit about, you said Michigan, Georgia, could you talk a little bit about how far the reach of Abandon Harris's organizing went and kind of where you focused your energy?
Yeah, so our campaign, we're in the swing states. They include Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania. They include North Carolina, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We had ground games in all of these states, but in particular, we made an emphasis in Wisconsin, Michigan, as well as Pennsylvania, and then perhaps even a more emphatic ending in Michigan. And so, but overall, we've had a swing state ground game, if we put it more generally, and we're very proud of what we've achieved and the mobilization, particularly in the last 2 weeks. We felt a lot of people came through. Oh, we garnered many volunteers, and we're able to also, put out digital ads, texting, phone banking, and so very exciting in terms of putting the whole package together.
Yeah, and I wonder, just for folks who maybe aren't familiar with Abandon Harris, I think the trajectory that you guys went through, where there was sort of at the beginning of the sort of election season, there were a couple of different groups who were talking about, ending the genocide and organizing and punishing the Democratic Party for overseeing this genocide. But maybe some hope that there could be some movement on this question. And I think there was some different strategies and tactics that different groups went with. I think we saw, unfortunately, Uncommitted just kind of swallowing it and signing off on voting for Harris. Can you talk about why it was important for Abandon Harris to support Jill Stein as part of a strategy for the anti-war movement?
We felt that the most critical move for us was that we would be the reason for the vice president's defeat. Our strategy was to punish the vice president because of her genocide, to then take the blame for her defeat, and so doing by power, in order to send a signal to the political landscape that you should never have ignored us when we came out again and again and again in the protest, screaming ceasefire now, and the retort has been ceasefire never. And so we have felt that this was so essential to achieving our goals, to show that we were powerful, that we were able to deliver a loss, either at the hands of people of conscience, Muslim Americans, their allies, alongside other groups across the country. And at this point, we feel redeemed that one of the most efficient ways to deliver this punishment is through the vehicle of the Green Party, by actually building infrastructure, by working from outside the two primary parties that dominate the United States, the oligopoly. You can achieve a great deal. You have a lot of flexibility. And we felt endorsing someone like Jill Stein, someone who's courageous, who's emblematic of what we seek in government, but also somebody who is not afraid to take the blame and when the time comes for the loss. And so we wanted to show that we had voters voting for the Green Party, voters who would outpace the disparity between the two top candidates, to show that we were the reason for the punishment. And Jill Stein was a truly effective vehicle in that sense.
Yeah, we were having a discussion earlier about how it's actually quite a compliment when your political enemies blame you, because then you're getting the credit that your movement deserves. And so I'm really glad you highlighted that. And I think the results that we're seeing, snapshots coming out of Dearborn, where Jill Stein is getting hundreds of votes and Kamala Harris is only getting in the double digits, shows the real impact that's been that this work has had. So I'm curious, you talked about the organizing conference in February, and I definitely will be really excited to see you and other Abandon Harris activists there. What other next steps do you think are important for the movement?
Yeah, in terms of next steps, we are intending to build and mobilize. We feel like we've detected some critical problems that we need to be able to constantly have active volunteers on the ground, people who are working in order to establish community engagement events, to think hard about what type of world we want and how we would lobby government. And so we feel that it's important that the Green Party or some type of party doesn't simply vanish during this interim period, that we build it, we build infrastructure, that we involve people, and that you don't need an election. You can mobilize, garner volunteers, and continue that work such that you're not constantly rebuilding from scratch every 4 years. We need to maintain the volunteers we currently have. We need to cultivate them. We need to continue keeping the campaign managers we've had in the States. And the goal would be to constantly keep people aware of the challenging challenging issues we must deal with, as well as a means to affect change at the level of government through mobilizing our people, lobbying states, city councils, and obviously government in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad for you to say that. I think the Green Party definitely needs to play a role in sort of this building of what does need to be a new party, right? That we need something that breaks from the two parties that are in the pocket of Raytheon and other war profiteers that are, sort of in the pocket of AIPAC and other, Israeli state advocacy groups. And that the way that we build that party, at least what I've seen in my years as an organizer, as you said, is not just to focus on sort of the flashpoint of every 4 years, but to focus on community and workplace struggles. I think one thing that we really saw essential to our organizing here in Seattle was focusing on tenants' rights or workers' rights, whether that was the minimum wage or protections against evictions. I'm curious if you see some kind of specific campaign in the immediate future for Abandon Harris. Maybe it's too soon, but I'm sure you guys have been having those late night coffee conversations.
Well, actually, I've been so focused on the campaign, and I've actually been also canvassing at polling stations today, and just waiting till the last second. I think it's so important just to like achieve a sense of completion after this horrifying year that just passed. And one of our more immediate next steps is for us to do strategic planning, to talk to our allies, to people in the campaign, volunteers, about what these next steps are. I do think that it's really important that we have some kind of success. Our people can sometimes feel demoralized. A genocide is happening, and to punish the vice president is nowhere near the final goal we wish to achieve. And so the capacity to make transformational change in government, for example, legislation to prevent Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, legislation in order to promote, better, fair wages, equality, even the types of issues you just referred to, evictions. That's really super critical. And at the city council level, environmental regulations, curbing and dealing with the challenge of climate change. I think having some kind of success will further the mobilization. One thing that I think has a lot of people don't recognize is that the past year people have attempted to bring in people in Congress, a strategy to effectively defeat the vice president, which might lead to her opponent coming into power. These are type of wins that are also potentially demoralizing. And we need to mobilize not merely by calling on people into the next challenge, but rather to mobilize by having some kind of win where everyone feels a sense of ownership in that win. And then through that win, you can further achieve your goals to end the genocide, which is a long-term project, medium to long-term project. I know a lot of people, this is really fatiguing just to hear that because it's genocide. And so, but for you know, evictions, climate change, Islamophobia, racism, we really have to work hard. There's so much to do, and the potential for transformational change to see success at every level of government, whether it's in the city of Dearborn or you know, the state of Michigan. There's real potential so long as we strategize, and through those successes we can then build more in order to capture these two parties who are oligopolistic and this duopoly that has been harmful to America.
Actually, I'm really glad that you kind of checked me on that question of there needed to be a laser focus, right, of getting out the vote. That was totally correct. I think it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by how messed up things are for working people right now. I mean, yes, the genocide being front and center, but the cost of living crisis, the environmental crisis. You know, my family's in Florida and was facing these devastating hurricanes. So it's like, you know, this feels like something terrible is happening every single day. But we have to like have a laser focus on this kind of a measure of success. And I do think it will be important in the coming days for Biden-Harris, and I want to, you know, worker strike back because of the work we've been doing on the ground as well, to really take a stock of, you know, those precincts where we had a presence, where we were at the masjids for, you know, every Jummah, you know, how many hundreds of votes for Jill Stein were we able to mobilize, and, you know, to really to blast that from the sort of rooftops of this is what we are capable of. Our movement is strong, and we have delivered a real punishment to the vice president, you know, and kind of, I think, to me also that February organizing conference is a place for us, you know, to bring those Arab and Muslim people alongside, you know, the rest of the anti-war movement and kind of cohere, you know, what does this building project look like? But you kind of have to spend some time with your allies before you go into battle, right?
Absolutely. And I think the conversations will be really important. I think for our community, the idea of having a partnership between what we currently call Biden-Harris, which is likely going to change in terms of name, and Workers Strike Back is not fully understood. I think that our community, Muslim Americans in particular, for example, here in Dearborn and more broadly throughout the country, the idea of a partnership isn't fully appreciated. That comes because we've understood the world through political parties. And one way to think about this is that we are, through our merger, at the dawn of creating a party, not a party necessarily that will gain elected office, but one that will cause transformational change in our culture, in our society, as well as through our lobbying at the level of government, by affecting change in terms of laws. And so I'm really excited about what we can achieve. I also think that we're being tested. I think our community wants to see what can come out of this relationship, as opposed to simply responding to the existing political party system. And so I think what some of the things that we have to do that isn't necessarily what type of policy is be really alert to the challenges and concerns of the community, show our presence after this election is over, meaning that our next steps, it might seem like we should rest, but I think we need to make tours of mosques together. We need to speak about what we can achieve, and that the world simply suddenly disappears. The political world disappears after an election, but there we are, still the concern for the plight of people in the community, that we should also show that while foreign policy is critical and that we're hand in hand together, that Workers Strike Back, Biden-Harris, we're very concerned about the plight of our community and their feeling of grievance, you know, being minorities, how we want to fight against racism and bring in many new allies into the scope of this work. I think this will be really powerful. because we can't depend any longer on on the media or other groups, if there was ever a time where we depended on them to actually make the case where we should be heard. I think we have to go to the people, to African Americans, Latinos, who largely vote within the two larger political parties, and then bring them in ways that further enhance the rights of all groups, including Muslim Americans. And so being present and also bringing lots of people in and making everyone recognize the value of working together and why we need to stand back away from the political parties. So there's a lot there, but I think the most immediate thing is just that we next steps doesn't mean a hibernation. We might want to even do a lot of work before February and create a type of feeling of a bulwark in February where we'll come together and establish a plan for the future that will last for 4 years, and just do a listening tour in the community.
One thing that Workers Strike Back has been talking about and that we announced earlier in the broadcast was that we want to plan for a protest at the inauguration, regardless of if it's Trump or Harris. You know, an anti-war, anti-genocide, you know, we're showing up on day one, knocking on your door. You know, we have not gone into hibernation. And so I think in terms of what comes between now and February, it's, you know, building the sort of brigades and buses of people who are going to be very clearly on the side of Palestine, on the side of Lebanon, on the side of peace, on the side of the planet. And yeah, I mean, I think in terms of Abandon Harris, yeah, you're going to need a new name. But I think what I love about the work that you guys have done, and that I think will be important to kind of be that through line to build that sort of broader coalition you're describing, is that offensive approach, right? I think that people are hungry for that. They feel deeply betrayed by the Democrats,
Absolutely.
deeply insulted by the Republicans, and they want somebody who's willing to kind of go toe to toe with the establishment. And I think that that sort of class struggle fighting energy is going to be really important.
Absolutely, and we have often begun by putting out an ultimatum, and we did that with the president. We did that with the vice president, giving them an opportunity to respond to our demands, an opportunity for negotiation, and we intend to do the same thing if the vice president's opponent wins. And we feel that it's critical that we demonstrate our power. And so mobilization and protest is most definitely going to be part of the equation. We feel that it's crucial that we prepare our people on the long haul for what might be a very challenging period ahead. And so the challenges will persist with different faces. And we need to not only mobilize, but also ensure that we have a critical narrative that people can recognize, and then from that narrative we can establish goals into the future, holding the Republicans just as much as we had the Democrats accountable for the continuous genocide, and ensuring that the public is aware more broadly that it is not the fault of smaller movements and groups and the American people. It's the fault of the elites who don't listen to the clear demands, so reasonable, that come from the people.
Yeah, I mean, I think something else we've been talking about, and I I actually know for a fact that Michigan is going to be an ongoing thing, is that, you know, the campuses are largely in Democratic controlled areas are ratcheting up the sort of repression against students, and a higher and higher number of them are facing criminal charges. And so I think in terms of building out the network and kind of tasks that our movement could be doing that sort of courtroom solidarity, building a movement to basically force the prosecutors to drop the charges. Those, I think, can also be concrete
Absolutely.
victories where you kind of challenge a given prosecutor, and like that they have a face, they have an address, that they, you know, it's a step towards proving how unpopular the genocide is to force the establishment to drop those criminal charges. So would definitely love to continue talking about that kind of stuff with you guys in the coming weeks. But
Absolutely.
I'm going to hold
Pleasure.
you to seeing you in Seattle in February
Yes.
for that conference. And I hope, you know, I hope there's an Abandon Harris contingent that's sitting
Absolutely.
in. Yeah, are there any last things you want to say about key takeaways for this election night for Abandon Harris before we let you go?
In October, we issued an ultimatum to the president calling for a ceasefire, nothing else. And the president ignored us. We set out campaigns and we called on our people across the country to join to ensure that a defeat would happen at our hands, that we would work actively to ensure a loss. And now we've come to this point where we will see what has happened in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Arizona and Georgia, where our people were actively campaigning against the vice president. And we ask the question, how could it have come to this point where the single demand is the end of genocide? And we had to campaign, we had to come out in huge numbers, we had to make sure that we had operational campaigns to defeat the vice president, the Democratic Party. It's outrageous that this is the type of organizing that's happening. Where we should be organizing is universal health care and environmental rights and minority rights. Instead, we're actually working to campaign against a government that's engaging in mass torture and genocide. This is how low we have come. And so the challenges are great, but we can say that what we're seeing in the maps, what we're seeing in Dearborn, the number of people who voted for Jill Stein, the fact that people were very excited when we were canvassing at the polling station today. People, when I would say vote against genocide, they would say terms like absolutely, of course, yes. And so we know that our people, their heart is in the right place, and we have a lot of work to do, but I am extremely confident and optimistic after this journey this past year, horrifying as it was. We have so much to build on after tonight and this upcoming week as we learn more about how well we were mobilized and how we can build to empower our communities across the country and ensure that we have lives worthy of our humanity, and not the ways in which the elites, the powerful, have ignored us to the point with which they come to us and demand our votes despite making lives perishable at their hands. This is the extraordinary nature of this moment. How much we are neglected, so evident that the elites have no care that the hundreds of thousands who might be killed. And so we have a lot to work on, and we intend to ensure that we take the blame for this defeat and we work to build from here.
Yeah, it's been really exciting to see the movement build its muscles. I feel like we've been lifting at the gym, like building the strength of this network. I've been seeing, just hundreds of Ben and Harris activists in all the states, like in the different chats, talking about who can be at this masjid. And so, yeah, I'm excited to sort of take that combat organization that we've been building over these last few weeks and continue to aim it at, the inauguration and then at building a new party. And thank you so much for joining us. I know it's getting kind of late on the East Coast, and thank you so much for all your hard work. I do hope you get at least a nap in before we sort of jump into the next thing, but I look forward to, sort of reviewing what we've accomplished and taking that next step together, Brother Hassan.
Absolutely. And sister, thanks for your amazing work, your guidance and wisdom these past weeks, Kshama, and everyone at Workers' Strike. Your passion truly inspires us, kindles our spirit, and we're excited to hold hands all together as we move in a new chapter.
Solidarity.
Solidarity.
So just to go into another results update, I think we're sort of seeing more and more results rolling in states that have been called Trump leads, 210 to Kamala Harris's 113. Most of these votes rolling in over the last hour ultimately don't count for much because of the undemocratic electoral college system. When a state that's expected to vote blue, like New York, does in fact go to Harris, it doesn't affect the outcome much. What matters are the results in a few closely contested swing states. Right now, the state to watch is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania will likely be the closest state and therefore ultimately decide the election. Trump has steadily been gaining there and now leading over Kamala Harris 51 to 48%, with 57% of the votes counted. Trump has also just now moved into a narrow majority in Michigan with 50.9%. 75% of the votes there still remain to be counted, but there's a real chance that Harris's loss of support among the Muslim voters because of her support for the genocide in Gaza could end up costing her the state, as we were just discussing with Brother Hassan. That blame, the rejection of the movement falls squarely at the feet of the Democratic Party, and we will take that blame because we organized to cost the genocider in chief this election. Many people are now beginning to predict that Trump is the likely winner of the election. The New York Times now puts the odds of a Trump win at 87%. This is the conclusion being drawn by analysts generally. So while the results are far from final, it's looking like there's a real possibility of a Trump victory. If this happens, and it's still far from fully decided, we should be clear that a Trump victory would in no way be a mandate for Trump and the Republicans' right-wing agenda. It would not represent a move to the right by the working class as a whole. It would be a rejection of Kamala Harris, one representing the deep anger of the Democrats on many levels by working people. First and foremost is the anger at the cost of living and all the obvious facts that the Democrats represent the billionaires and Wall Street, not working people. There is deep anger at the status quo, and that anger has now made its way to the ballot box. For all of Harris's pretense about being a change candidate, it is inescapable that she is the sitting vice president presiding over collapsing living standards and a genocide in the Middle East. We can have no illusions that in any way, shape, or form that Trump, if he wins, would represent working people. We can have no illusions that he is anti-war, despite his vote Trump, vote peace signs. Trump will absolutely double down on the genocide in Gaza. It would nonetheless be historic that Kamala Harris has been defeated in part due to her and Biden arming and funding a genocide in Gaza. That the Arab American community, the anti-war movement, young people refused to support her, that they helped defeat her after she was given every chance to commit to ending military aid for Israel and completely refused to give an inch. She and the Democrats have no one to blame but themselves. As we mentioned earlier, they've been out spending the last few weeks of this election careening to the right and campaigning alongside, warmonger inheritor Liz Cheney. Kamala Harris and the Democrats have no one to blame but themselves, and the degree to the movement that our movement played a role in defeating the genocidal vice president, if that's what happened, our movement should claim victory for that. We should tally the results in Michigan. We should compare, what is the slide between Joe Biden in 2020 and what Harris got to this year. Even though we do not in any way, shape, or form want Trump. Trump is completely reactionary, anti-worker, and a warmongering billionaire. And we reject outright the idea that because he's a billionaire, he's a good businessman who will run this country well or will not be corrupt in some way. He's been proven in all of his business dealings to be absolutely and thoroughly corrupt. We cannot support either of the parties of the bosses or the billionaires. What is desperately needed is an end to the bankrupt two-party system, and this is a step in that direction. If Trump wins, it will send the Democrats into crisis, as clearly significant sections of their base have correctly abandoned them. And we all already know from Trump 1.0 that the Democrats are not a useful vehicle to fight the right wing and Donald Trump. We urgently need to begin the process of building an alternative, and we will be discussing this at an upcoming mass organizing conference in February, as well as our Worker Strike Back meetings next week. Make sure to check them out on the event page and see if there's one in your area, and if not, join us on Zoom. As we have said many times, regardless of who wins the White House, we will have to fight back against them. And now we will have to fight Trump, and we will have to fight the billionaire class whose interests he represents. Trump will attack working people, he will attack immigrants, he will attack the poor, and he will attack women's rights. And just as in 2016, it will be our movement that will have to stop him. We will be the ones to effectively fight back. The strength of our movement is everything, and it is much more important than who is in the White House. On paper, Richard Nixon's record was far more progressive than any recent president. Nixon was right-wing, reactionary, racist. Are we live still? Warmongering. Oh, this is like a big buildup. Maybe they cut our internet.